Howdy, folks. Welcome to the season end podcast that Louis and I typically end up doing together. The one year we called the summer camp season, I believe that was the year of the bubble. The Tampa year, I believe we regarded as the year from hell. And this year, I think the year from heaven. Huh? Pretty fun year. Lots of good stuff happened. The person joining me, as he does very often on my podcast, is Louis Zatzman, a writer at very many places, but most notably Raptors Republic, and second most notably a small place called the 538. Is there anything else you'd like included in the plug?
No, man, you always give. If I were to plug myself, just be like this schlub. You always give me more than I deserve. So no more to include.
We love the term schlub. I love schlub.
Yeah, I don't understand how Yiddish entered your vocabulary as a rural Saskatchewanian, but
Saskatchewanite.
Saskatchewanite. But Yiddish improves everybody's vocabulary. Always really useful stuff.
Schlub, schmuck, whatever. But it's because of TV, right? Yiddish
All
sayings
the
are
show
inherently
writers,
yes,
Jewish.
yes. So anyway, a couple of schlubs here to talk about what has happened this season. So I'm going to kick it off to you, Louis. The number one binding ethos, whatever it is, I'd like you to tell me what drove the success of this Raptors team above all else.
I think that's usually the first question, right, for every team, and usually an uninteresting question. It's usually the best player or, the shooting. For the Raptors, it's the most interesting question because they were a team defined as much by their strength as by their weaknesses, as much by their consistency as their inconsistency. And so when you ask what drove their success, it ends up being Russian nesting dolls of answers, right? You could say, well, it was their length, and then you pull off the outer layer, and you end up saying, well, hold on, they didn't have any guards, and no one could shoot, so maybe their length wasn't that important. Then you say, oh, well, then perhaps it was their defense caused by their length. Then you pull it back again and say, no, their defense was super inconsistent, and they gave up a ton of corner threes and out rim attempts. Anyway, so I'm sure we're going to keep peeling back throughout the pod. I'm not going to just go on an hour-long monologue now. But to me, what drove the ultimate success, kind of a cop-out answer, it was Nick Nurse's willingness to sacrifice his preferences as a coach to suit what the team needed to win in the short term.
Can you elaborate on that? Because
Yes.
I feel like we disagree from jump. How
Okay, so Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet, right? Fred drove winning for the first half, Pascal in the second. But I think what was at the root of both was Nick Nurse started out as a very different team from how he ended. And he has a reputation, partially earned, for being fairly stubborn to his principles. He is an ideological coach. And that just didn't factor in nearly as much this season, especially when it came to erstwhile analytical things like three-point shooting. The Raptors have led the league, top 5 in the league in three-point shooting since Nick Nurse took over. And this year, they just stopped. They're like, you know what? We can't shoot. It's not good. We can find better shots. They didn't shoot any threes. That's what I mean. Nurse sacrificed his ideology for the preferences of the team. And that's, Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, as these sort of on-court drivers of winning, are good examples because layups are the best shot. Fred took none. Threes are the second best shot. Pascal took none. It was a unique team no matter how you look at it.
I was talking about this today, and outside of Pascal, nobody who played regular rotation minutes on the Raptors eclipsed the league average true shooting percentage. And the Raptors as a whole were bottom of the barrel in assist percentage, bottom of the barrel in effective field goal percentage, and they still thrived. So I guess I do agree with you in the fact that I talked about this, I can't remember who with, but when they asked, does the length make this team better? Because you and I have both had our reservations about what drove winning in this team and where we'd like to see it change. And even a couple times thinking back, leaning towards more conservative expected outcomes in the NBA for how a team should perform, what it should look like, and seeing that the Raptors moved away from that in a few different ways. Eventually getting back to something like more pick and roll possessions for Siakam, which Nurse has always been kind of reluctant to give. That was something he bent on. Again, losing the threes, something he bent on. Leaning harder into a completely different type of offense, something he bent on. But the defensive principles, I guess, did you think there was any delineation from Nurse's original view of the team there?
No. Just no. I really expected at some point the Raptors to institute just a little bit of a conservative package just to have. We saw the inverse with the Milwaukee Bucks last season in their championship run. They had one of the best conservative defenses ever built in 1819, 1920, and they were really inflexible on it. And then 2021, they said we need to have all sorts of other schemes. They instituted switching, blitzing, all sorts of stuff. Wasn't ideal. They still were best playing conservatively, but they just had to get it in the bag so that when the playoffs rolled around, they had all these options. And it was unbelievable. It was just so effective when they had them. The Raptors never put normal defense in the bag. And on one hand, you have so many lockdown isolation defenders. Healthy Fred VanVleet, lockdown point of attack defender, one of the absolute best in the league. OG Anunoby, lockdown point of attack defender, one of the best in the league, on top of, post defender, helped everything. Pascal Siakam, lockdown, help defender, rotating defender. Precious Chua, lockdown isolation defender, switch defender, rim protect. They have all these guys who can defend in isolation. At some point, do you not want to say, let's just see what happens if we stay at home?
Mm-hmm. That is probably the most interesting thing, and that speaks to matchups over principles, and when do you decide to bend towards one or the other? And the Raptors, they didn't bend often. It was principle above everything else, and that drove a lot of how they succeeded, and probably instilling those principles across the board. Oh, go ahead.
Which how they succeeded, I want to say this can also drive failure, right? Look at Bjorkgren in Indiana. Ideological coaches can have a lot of trouble sometimes. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, totally. But it is interesting, right? Is that the reason why the change of pace, no point guard, long lineups, even with guys like Delano Banton, who we saw by the end of the regular season was still well short of being a rotation level NBA player, but still had mountains of success in the Raptors' super specific scheme that fetishized length and activity. But the Raptors, right, by instilling those principles above all else, even if it's OG on ball, even if it's Fred on ball, you help from the corner. No matter what, we send the help. That meant that you got consistent performances defensively from those transitional lineups. And that ended up being a really, really big deal as the Raptors during the back end of the season really started winning every single minute that Chris Boucher played, for example.
Yep.
So that in particular, the fruits of their labor, I think, were eaten in that regard.
We're est. Est, that's Yiddish for eat. We're so much more Yiddish coming.
So let's start with defense and offense then, and kind of describe what we think the main drivers of it were, not as far as players, because we'll get into talking about the players, of course, but let's talk about what they do defensively, as far as scheme, as far as decision making. It doesn't have to be extremely rote, but let's just talk about what we think the Raptors tried to do on both sides of the floor. So whichever side you want to start with, go.
I'll take the offense because I have some numbers here. So I wrote a piece for 538 about how the Raptors were at their best playing out of the post. And I think that's not shocking. It was like obvious watching, but it was shocking how it happened because they just didn't have centers who played out of the post. They played their wings there. And you mentioned they were bottom of the barrel in assist rate. They had 4 players above average in assist rate for their position on the team. Those 4 players, Pascal Siakam, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, Thaddeus Young. The 4 guys who played out of the post. The post was their most efficient offensive set in the half court out of, points per chance as compared to isolation, pick and roll, handoff. And it was really effective. They had 3 wings, super interchangeable, 3 of the longest non-centers in the league. All great scoring one-on-one, all great scoring, off the pass. And I feel like a lot evolved out of that. So, you run pick and rolls. A lot of the time, if they switch, you want to dump it in the post. Isolation may go down as an isolation in the, whoever's notching it up on the team, but might have a little back to the basket work there. It's a little bit of both. A lot of Toronto's isolation players were fits and starts, 2 dribble, stop, 1 dribble, stop. And so that was successful. As a pick and roll team, they were not successful throughout the season. Fred VanVleet, when he was hot, was amazing, hitting pull-up threes, but he spent half the season terribly injured and was not able to hit those pull-up threes and had no burst to get to the rim. He showed better passing, but by and large, couldn't lift their pick and roll game. One of the lesser high-volume pick and roll creators in the league. Pascal Siakam, though, picked up the slack there. And I should add, in the playoffs, pick and rolls were their most efficient play. That was because Pascal took over there and because Joel Embiid just ate any post up. So it's hard to say what was successful because the playoffs are much more real a barometer than the regular season. So, yeah, I would say the offense was some successes, some failures. We saw a lot of trying to ameliorate the weaknesses, absolutely gunning in transition, even though they kind of sucked in transition, one of the least efficient transition teams in the league. If you just pile on frequency, it doesn't matter because even a bad transition team is better than the best half-court offensive team. And they just piled on. They attacked the offensive glass because, you know what? If we miss 2 shots in a row, maybe we'll make the third, and then it's a good offensive possession, even though, we're inefficient. So they tried to find these hacks. And I wonder, were the hacks because Nick Nurse and the analytics team saw untapped advantage in the NBA? This is something the league is not doing. We can win minutes because of this. Or if the hacks were saying, we're not good, this is how we can sort of make that not good hurt us the least. So all interesting questions going forward.
That is the question, by the way. What is the point of Genesis that drove this, for lack of a better term, like innovation? And
I thought the question was what drove their success.
Well, but that's
or what does Scottie Barnes become?
Right. There's a lot of really good questions about this team, as is any team that plays in a unique way. Like the Bucks, for example, they, what was it, 6 years ago, were jet setting to try and do what the Raptors are currently doing, and were not as successful at it as the Raptors just were.
Well,
And
Thonmaker is not Precious Achiuwa.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. Even Giannis in those early seasons was not yet what Pascal is now. Yes. And Pascal, like that was the thing that the Raptors offense, in asking guys to thrive in isolation and then in post-ups, if those types of actions aren't being supplied by just lights out shooting and spacing, it becomes a game of what hole can you fit yourself into?
Pascal led the league in isolations, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Is it a chasm? Is it a pinhole? And how do you operate out of a broom closet? And Pascal Siakam is a broom closet connoisseur.
He was Harry Potter.
Yeah, that exactly. Harry Potter. And making magic out. Yeah.
The greatest wizard out of a broom. Yeah, anyway.
Yes.
You get it.
That's exactly right. And that was really cool to see. I am really intrigued to see if they follow up with this season. Moderate upgrades come in the offseason. Let's assume they don't shake anything up. They're not trying to target one of the begrudged Utah Stars or something like that, right? The gang looks mostly the same for year 2 of this experiment. I would be really interested to see in the playoffs if that post hub that they constantly go to is far more successful if Fred VanVleet is closer to shooting the 46+% on catch and shoot threes. That is maybe more something you're used to as a a salve for when the ball funnels out of the post when teams load up. And same with Gary Trent and OG as well, because their catch and shoot performances in the playoffs completely undid any of the mismatch dominance that they had otherwise, which was disappointing.
We never saw the Raptors healthy.
No, which
Not one
sucks.
game. I do wonder if they run it back and they're just unbelievable. It's possible. It's within the realms of possibility. Realm of possibility.
Right.
That they're healthy. Fred VanVleet cans everything. Scottie Barnes takes a step forward, and that's all they need.
Okay, so we're gonna have the Fred Pascal conversation, but we'll kick the can a little bit down the road.
Okay.
So yeah, let's say that's so offense. It sounds like they work through the post, they isolate a lot. This is driven by their massive size in the middle of the lineup and the skills attached to the players who have that massive size relative to their matchups and the switches that come along with their actions. That's mostly OG, Pascal, and Scottie. And then along with that, Fred VanVleet had really good pick and roll game that had improved immensely the passing and the scoring out of it, but that was the legs were taken out of it by the injury. Now, the plays they do to get there is that Nick Nurse basically, and we'll move on to defense after this. Nick Nurse basically wants mostly a read and react offense, where not only were we talking about principles on defense, but we're talking about principles on offense. And it's trying to make sure that the players always look and find advantage out of these simple sets so that there's always an improvisational bent, which is harder for teams to address as far as matching up and scheming for. And so this is what you and I have affectionately referred to as the clunk of imperfect decision making and imperfect skill sets. So what did you think about that aspect of it?
I thought that they would diversify. They hired Trevor Gleason.
Yeah.
Offensive minded, a flex guy, I believe. And I think he filled the Chris Finch sort of role in the staff. And it was interesting on, I think it was Media Day. Someone asked Nick Nurse, are you going to run more flex with Gleason on staff? He said, maybe. And not really was the answer.
The only when I was digging through like playbook stuff, the only flex I found was flex that they had already been running. By the way,
Yeah.
I didn't see any new flex action.
Yeah. I expected them to adapt the playbook. I understand why they didn't. They were calling plays with gigantic blown up flashcards from the bench for most of the season. All of this, I don't know if they ever stopped. You can't add plays if you're teaching your rookies and sophomores how to play like you're cheating off a test, with writing stuff on your arm. So I understand why they stayed in the base offense, but it would have been really nice to add a lot more. And they added really just surface level changes to try to get Fred attacking more off ball, for example, later in the season. But they never really went past the read and react. And they only had Pascal Siakam, very good read and react offense, just fantastic. Scottie Barnes has, I think, proven to be phenomenal. That's kind of it as far as guys who are excellent at read and react offense.
Well, OG as a second side guy, though, not as a primary. Yeah.
Yes. But too often he wasn't allowed to be that because in the beginning of the season he had to be a primary. And then late in the season they had no shooting. So he wasn't even second side. He was just spacing. And so again, a lot of what we're talking about is going to come down to injuries. But people weren't allowed to be in their primary positions or their ideal positions, which sort of pushed back the success for read and react. But also their personnel wasn't ideal for it.
And I think it made sense if you were, and honestly, the Raptors organization has been more pessimistic than the fan base in the past. Many times, and has been caught with their hand in the cookie jar of trying to trade away their incumbent stars a few times, right? The Raptors, maybe more so than any other, maybe more so than any other successful team over the past decade, the Raptors have said, maybe we move him, and then no, and then still found success. A lot of teams don't the locker room chemistry, everything goes to crap afterwards. But the Raptors, so as far as doing this read and react thing, you had Kyle Lowry, and then he's gone. And Kyle Lowry is the king of read and react.
The god. He's the god.
You put him in a pick and roll. The floor starts moving. You let him interpret how everybody's moving. Let him map the court and let him find the best pass. Move guys out of the lanes he wants them out of with his eyes. Find the pass on the strong side that everyone thought was going to the weak side. Bada boom, bada bing. Easy stuff. But with Pascal's best playmaking stretch to that point was in kind of rote sets out of the post, that kind of stuff. And read and react, he actually struggled quite a bit in Tampa for what it's worth.
Yeah.
And he was an above average playmaker when he was coming off of the bench. He was an above average playmaker the first 2 years he was starting, but that wasn't enough to be a hub. He finally kind of gave them a big reward on that. But what I'm trying to say is the offense read and react to go from Kyle Lowry, it seemed like it wanted to go to Scottie Barnes. Like Scottie Barnes, if you watched him at Florida State, every play that made you say, wow, was this broken play where he finds the one out of, 18 different options on the court that he could go to. He found the best one. And we see that in transition, and we see that in broken plays at the NBA level as well. So
fake handoffs, baby.
Yeah, keeper plays, right? And just where he has the ball downhill off of an offensive rebound where the defense is trying to catch up to where they think he'll make the decision, and he always inverts that, and he always makes the decision they don't think he's going to make. He always makes the pass they don't think he has access to. So it seemed like once again, the Raptors moving from Kyle to Scottie, and then Pascal kind of wedging himself in there and saying, I'm the guy, by the way, max player. I'll succeed in this system. It asks a lot of me, but I'll do it. And I think that's where the offense comes down to Pascal carrying at the end of the season, and then Fred's wizardry. But of course, Gary and Scottie fit in as well. But we'll check in for listener and watcher. We'll check in on player by player stuff later on in the podcast. So defense. Would you rather I start with this one, or would you like to give us your interpretation?
No, I started last time. You start with defense.
Okay, so defense. Obviously help oriented. The most important thing that you would talk about with this defense is that since they help so much and since they're so active, they have no qualms about sending multiple people at the rim to try and contest shots or contest it so early that the ball funnels elsewhere. This is why the Raptors were first in the amount of corner three-pointers allowed. They were middle of the pack as far as the conversion rate, and there's, competing conceptions of can you affect three-point percentage or volume? And a lot of people think you can only affect volume. So the Raptors, as far as that goes, they were affecting volume how they wanted to, only at the rim. And that was because they didn't have Marc Gasol anymore. Yeah. And they really hated the way that the Aaron Baines stuff went or the Alex Len stuff went. And so they just kind of like dropped it. No more center, no more traditional drop big. We're going to rotate everybody off the corner. We'll rotate from the elbow. We'll rotate from everywhere. You're picking up that dribble. You're going to make a jump pass. You're going to make a pass that maybe you didn't think you would because you don't get this earlier rotation against other teams. And we're going to try and jump that passing lane. That is the main thing that drove the distinguished aspect of the Raptors defense. Miami does this a lot, and New York does this a lot. Minnesota is also a team that does this a lot, but the Raptors do it significantly more. There's the proprietary information as far as the closeouts or long closeouts that the Raptors ask of their team, and they are significantly higher than any other team as far as
the Raptors,
the length.
I'm going to get the exact. I think they had 3 of the top 5 players in closeouts,
and long ones too. Like guys have to recover the length of the court basically to get back into a play.
Yeah.
I'll keep talking.
Please continue. I'll get the closeouts.
Yeah. And then so on top of that, the Raptors once again help oriented. If you get beat, you see a guy rotating. The Raptors a lot of peel switching. You recover to the player, and you don't try and catch up to your own guy. You take that kinetic energy in your body and you transfer it elsewhere. And so the Raptors being like-sized at every position, and as we talked about at the top of this podcast, most players being quite capable at handling either guys in their own position or being able to handle for a few seconds guys outside of their position in isolation, in a post matchup where they can front, or, they'll have help from a dig down or whatever. The Raptors weren't afraid to switch. And those principles guided exactly where they went defensively. And then obviously the players they had there drove exactly how much they succeeded at it. So if you have the numbers, please say them. But then on top of that, I want to ask, what players do you think drove their defensive success the most this season?
Okay. Database not loading at the moment. So I will start with what players drove their defensive success. So you described it really well, right? They were an X out as a philosophy. Just never go back to your original man. Switch, 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 rotate, rotate, rotate. And that works really well with some players, not super well with others. I actually think Chris Boucher was maybe, I don't want to say the most important, but I really want to say the most important.
He was great.
Yeah. Chris
So
Boucher,
good.
can't even be described how good a season he had for Toronto. On top of being their best or second best rim protector, especially when he wasn't actually in the play. I don't have numbers for this. I don't know if anyone has numbers for this. Maybe teams do. But if this exists, I would love if someone told me.
Teams do. The answer is that teams always have the numbers.
Everything. Yeah. But rim protection coming from a distance, like rim protection after steps versus rim protection without steps. I would say Chris Boucher was very average at rim protection without steps. He got put in the rim a lot. He did learn to take charges, which is a really nice counter for him. But with steps, he was just like by far Toronto's best rim. He was insane. His verticality, he didn't just try to block shots every time anymore. Great defensive rebounder this season. Ridiculous closeout to the corner when he wasn't protecting the rim. When he came in on the court, it wasn't just offensive rebounding and shooting for a big. It was the defense that he changed. And so, I mean, he is replacing capable guys, though. So OG Anunoby is at his best still Toronto's just heart and soul on the defensive end. He is what forces turnovers. He is the definitive guy who his presence determines whether they force turnovers or not. Pascal Siakam is the philosophy. I mean, all these guys. The reason why they have this is because Pascal is, to me, the best court coverage defender in the league. Maybe Giannis, but Pascal's up there. So a lot of guys who define the defense, without any of whom I don't think they would even do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, we went long enough on Boucher, and we'll talk about Boucher later. But yes. Pascal, I do want to say, because now I'm not saying he's faultless. Pascal made lots of mistakes on defense the same way that every player does. And Pascal made mistakes early upon his return. But he also, and this is something that I hope the fan base recognizes, and that's what we're supposed to be. We're the liaison to the fan base, because Nick Nurse, he's not going to communicate scheme to the fan base. Neither are the players. And we're the liaison to the fan base, understanding as analysts and that kind of stuff. And hopefully we get it right a lot of the time. For next year, I hope that, listener, viewer, when we talk about this peel switch heavy, X out heavy, never recover to your man offense, Pascal Siakam looking like the guy who's left holding the bag because he made the mistake is oftentimes the guy who is identifying where the mistake was made and recovering out to it. So it's just, I want something for people to understand for next season when they're playing the same defense. When everybody sinks in and Pascal is playing the proper principled help defense, and then the ball shoots out to the corner, and the guy who got beat is supposed to be filtering to the corner, but Pascal is the guy rotating, that does not mean that Pascal was the guy who made the mistake. And I saw a lot of comments about that this year. And that also applies to Chris Boucher and Precious, for example. Big men have it so hard for some reason.
Not just fans, a lot of media have criticized them for not. Okay, some numbers. Pascal Siakam led the league in closeouts this year by over 100 closeouts. Just a preposterous, like 10%. No, like almost almost 15% higher than second. Second was Scottie Barnes. And Fred VanVleet was the third on the Raptors and 11th in the league. Fred VanVleet also had a very, when he was the guy closing out, team shot very poorly. So his length doesn't seem to phase him at all.
I can't believe Joel Embiid hit that game winner with Fred with the hand in the thigh.
Everyone said it's an easy shot. It's an easy shot. There was a hitch. The shot changed a little bit because Fred was there.
We'll agree to disagree on that one, I think. I think he's just shifting weight. He's turning. But anyway, that's kind of what we think about defense, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, I never got an answer. It wasn't a rhetorical question. Do you think they should have, at times, run just a simple stay-at-home scheme?
No. Honestly,
hell yes.
Honestly, no, because we'll see what happens with Precious and how he develops. Maybe my answer changes next year because Precious came so far being able to contain ball handlers and still recover to his man. Like Precious is a pick and roll guy, kind of blows my mind. So maybe we'll see, but will they kind of invert their principles for one player? And how hard is it for players to kind of plug that in and institute those principles play by play? That's really tough. I think that their principles, and this is, I came to this point like at maybe February or early January where I said, I think they're getting the most out of this team. As ill-gotten as games may be, as terrible as it might look at times when they get just bombarded from the corners, I thought that they were getting the most out of their team as far as playing guys huge minutes, as far as trying to maximize these types of possessions, the turnover differential, the democratic rim protection. I thought that they found the best way to make things work. So I wouldn't change it.
And to that point, I don't think any other coach in the league squeezes 48 wins out of this roster.
Yeah.
I'm not saying Nick Nurse is the best coach in the league, right? I think you put him in charge of Miami, for example, and I think Spoelstra has a better philosophy to make that team run. But the way the Raptors run could have been a disaster with many other coaches, many other styles of running this team. And so when you say they maximized, I think 100th percentile maximized what this team could be in the regular season.
Yeah, the 95th percentile and above. As silly as it is to be talking in percentiles, like to actually dig down and say, if I was thinking in that way, I'd say 95th percentile and above. They hit it, and especially like playing everybody so many minutes. So is Nick Nurse the only guy who would have pulled those triggers in succession? Perhaps, yeah. Nurse deserves a lot of credit. As many things as I have qualms about, especially like for some time about how critical he was of players in media and stuff like that. And I have significant qualms about that. And, I would like a little bit more structure in the offense, but I can still recognize what they want to achieve with read and react. But as far as getting the most out of this roster, as far as achieving stuff in the standings, yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say it's tough to imagine another coach. And if you were to, it's probably only 2 or 3 getting this much out of the team. So, yeah.
And so I also wanted to talk about, you only run drop defense with a center who can play drop coverage. And as good as Toronto's defenders are, they don't have a Brook Lopez on the team. And so a lot of people wanted Toronto to play more conservatively at different times in the season. And you saw that those voices sort of quieted down towards the end when they really just got hot and stayed there. But maybe you add a Yusuf Nurkic type guy and you have drop in the package. But I don't know, man. Scottie Barnes had a couple attempts at it early in the season against Boston, I think. He played some drop against Robert Williams, and it looked terrible. And that's totally normal. That's not a
Mm-hmm.
criticism of Scottie Barnes. It's just you need that guy, and maybe Precious becomes that guy, but they don't have it right now.
Well, I thought there's been quite a few games this past season where Precious actually looked really good in high drop. But it's kind of like, what are you trying to achieve with drop? And typically what you're trying to achieve is you're trying to keep the play in front of the center, and you trust that the center, because of the way lobs are thrown, the center's standing height means that they don't have to commit, and
Contest
they still they can contest late, and they still gum up the vertical lanes for lobs because you don't have to commit to anything. And Precious is so good at committing and recovering, but that's a really tricky line to walk against the best players night in and night out. And to ask him to do that would playing drop puts way more pressure on Precious, because again, he's the only guy who can even do it on the team. Like Pascal can't do it. As great as Pascal is, Scottie, as high as he can bat on certain possessions, he can't do it either. So yeah, Precious can do it, but not for these long, not for a full season. So yeah, I think it's just maybe you leave that at the door given the guys they have on the roster.
The only time it would have mattered was game 6 when they were attacking Gary Trent. That's a moment when maybe you switch to drop. Gary doesn't get switched on to Harden and then doesn't get switched on to Embiid. Look, Doc Rivers coached an incredible game. Game 6 was a masterpiece from Philadelphia. Joel Embiid played just phenomenal offense, as did James Harden. And maybe you want a guy who can do that for a game like that, but it doesn't affect that much of the rest of the season.
Yeah, especially when we consider Precious, as important as he was, especially to the Raptors' wins, he's still playing like 25 minutes a game. He's not like Gary or Pascal that were. Well, Pascal every single time is 40 plus.
40 minutes a game,
Yeah. Nobody else on the Raptors, by the way, ever had the output that Pascal did. It's just, and he didn't break down. Pascal is a marvel to me. But okay, we're past the offense and defense, what drove this team. Let's do players. Let's start with Fred VanVleet. Actually, let's start with Scottie.
One question first. I'm so sorry.
Right. Yeah.
In the very beginning, when I said what drove success, and I said coaching, flexibility, and you said I think we might disagree, I wanted to revisit. Now that we've actually broken down the arguments, do we disagree?
Yeah, I'll never give coaching above. Never.
Well, obviously the players are so you can't even express how much more important the players are than coaches. Right?
Yeah. So even if it's just if I quibble with the way you framed it.
Fair. Okay.
I couldn't. Nick Nurse is a guy who wears a pinky ring just like me, but his is far more obnoxious, and I don't want him to put another one on the opposite hand. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't give it to him. Not when he's just like pressing the minutes button and the other guys are like just grinding like hell.
Your argument is like all over the map, but I understand what you're trying to say pinky ring wise. And sure, players are the ones who drive wins. I phrased it poorly. Okay, Scottie Barnes.
It's a repurposed Katie Heindl joke, the pinky ring one. But okay, Scottie Barnes, Rookie of the Year. Hey, he won. It was on his lock screen, among other things. Support my family, build a foundation that, my children, their children's children. Yes, destroy my competition. Be the best in practice. Flex, do all the big manly stuff. He did it. Scottie Barnes, your Rookie of the Year. What was the most outstanding aspect of his game to you, Louis Zatzman?
I would say his this is going to be so stupid. His ability to always have his hips facing the rim.
Yeah.
That it's so specific. But combined with length, which 7'3.25, I think, is what he was listed at out of the combine. When you are 7'3" wingspan, combined with always being in line with the rim and having elite plus touch, everything works. Isolations work, post-ups work, pick and roll works, handlers, everything works. With like that one skill set was the seed from which his domination grew?
It's like a gimbal, like when they talk about these cameras that they always find, like, you can move around, but the cameras are always perfectly still, and like drones and stuff like that, that while the drone is flying up in the air, the gimbal keeps it perfectly trained and it doesn't move at all because
It's a great description. It's
the
great.
gimbal counteracts everything that's happening to keep it still. He is gimbaled, dude. That dude
Yeah.
is gimbaled up. And he will always, that gimbal swivels right to the bucket and it is on time and on target every single time. So yeah, you bring up being square, those hips to the bucket to take every single possession from having his ass face the bucket to all of a sudden he's like face to face with a defender who is like at, a 70-degree angle trying to not get run over, and he's deftly finishing with like a Statue of Liberty over top. That drove so much of his success as a cutter and as an isolation hub.
He could have too small. Every player in the NBA
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
like there's big, and then there's gigantic, and then there's Scottie Barnes. Like, okay, he's listed at 6'7", might be 6'10", plays like he's 7'4".
He astounds me, and that was kind of when I was doing the breakdown of his first playoff series, and I got to do the comparison between, well, how did Pascal attack
Yeah.
Joel
Great series, by the way.
when Joel sagged off of him in 2019, and what did Scottie do? And you see Pascal's like working in and like doing this deft little spin, so much so that Embiid like steps out of bounds trying to anticipate him, and Siakam spins off his shoulder, and then it cuts to Scottie Barnes dribble shoulder, where he gets Embiid airborne, and then he finishes over top of him, and he carries that momentum all the way. He doesn't stop short. He keeps going. He's trying to get as close to the rim. And yeah, those guiding principles for his offensive game drove so much success because they're backed by this just peak physicality. He's huge. He's dominant. He'll scream in your face. Even if somebody else on his team scores, he'll scream in your face. He's just there. He wants it. He has it. As hyperbolic as it sounds, there's something that drives Scottie to success.
I'm a big chess fan and player.
Yeah.
And Pascal Siakam plays very positional basketball, right? He's taking small pawn moves, trying to set up an end game, not a huge blowout checkmate, right? He takes little advantages to build on them with footwork, with length, with fakes, with shimmies. Scottie Barnes is like Mikhail Tal, where he is sacrificing the house, man. Like bishop f7, knight sack into a pawn, queen sack, and boom, there's a rook backed up by a pawn mate, and no one saw it coming at all. Like everything is coming at you with very little setup. It's preposterous how different they play and how well they play together. Because if we're talking about how much success Scottie Barnes had, we are loath to just talk about this one thing. As great as it was, a lot more. And one thing that really stood out to me, Pascal was the best player and probably will be Toronto's best player for some time. Scottie's not going to come in on day one next year as Toronto's lodestone.
And if he does, great.
If he does, like, game over. But
yeah,
the most important thing then for next year, as far as Scottie goes, is how unbelievably he works with Pascal.
Mm-hmm. That's like a great aspect of it. We'll save that for the Pascal version of things, maybe then. And so we talked a little bit about Scottie's dynamic reads, transition, broken plays, and all that kind of stuff. And so let's finish off the playmaking plus filler stuff that he did offensively too. So the offensive rebounding, I guess you'll do offensive rebounding. I'll finish off the playmaking. As far as reads, yes, I am conductor here. As far as reads in rote situations, Scottie probably has a long way to go.
Yeah.
And this is something when I did that deep dive back in January to look at every possession that he ran and what were the outcomes of all of these different things, just so I could find exactly what's driving his success. And a lot of it was isolation, but a lot of his success as a passer were those broken plays and stuff like that. But as far as a rote decision maker, he did not do that well as a guy who like was posted up and passed out of the post. He wasn't comfortable reading the floor inverted from the post. He was really comfortable reading the floor. We talked about flex. If the Raptors were to run flex action or like Horn's chin or something like that to either get Pascal downhill or Horn's chin's punch if they're getting a post up to get Pascal downhill into a post, or if they're running Horn's flex to get OG into post. If Barnes is the Horn, he reads those plays. He gets that angle. He can pass more aggressively, faster, less arc on it. As a trigger man, I thought he was pretty great. And so that was nice to see. So that means he's more diverse in that way. So the passing was what it needed to be, but I don't think his passing exceeded expectations, honestly. I think it was about where we expected. I'm really excited to see how it grows in the more dependable, you talked about Pascal playing chess as if he were trying to get to spots. And it's not about the unpredictability. It's about the overwhelming dominance from those places and what he determines that you do to him there. I'm excited to see Scottie find success as a passer in some of the more predictable ways, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and you could see some development like that with a guy like Chris Boucher, who for a long time was at his best only because of the spectacular. Scottie, similarly, Chris Boucher became the guy he is this year because he added the foundation on top of those high arching, stained glass windows, the spectacular. It should be mentioned that Scottie Barnes had the worst on-offs within Toronto's rotation. And that's because he was at his best when he was spectacular. Just like Chris Boucher every year before this one. And when he adds that solid base as a passer, as a defender, we haven't talked about his defense at all. That's when he will drive winning above and beyond like anyone in the NBA. And so a lot of growth, a lot to work on. But man, the foundation is just, it's going to come because he is so good when he's good.
Yeah, I think that brings us to the close on his offense with the added part of like the base of his offense. The only thing that's really missing is the shooting. There's a lot of utility in him as an offensive rebounder that really fit the Raptors ethos as well.
I missed my my conduction there for offensive rebound.
And lead a horse to water joke, something. Anyway. But anyway, like Scottie, the tip in to tie the game, and then in another game, getting an offensive rebound and getting, those free throws, like he's positioned in the dunker spot on the Raptors' final play, which typically was a combination of Fred and Pascal, something of that sort. And they don't fill the corner with Scottie. They put him in the dunker. Or they don't fill above the break with Scottie, they put him in the dunker. And it's because he has so much utility as an offensive rebounder. He's a really cerebral cutter. The screening obviously can use work. He's a rookie, but he filled in so many ways that are considered like role player stuff, wheel greasing and all that. But I tell you this, he was pretty impressive at all that stuff. So to the defense, which was mostly you have a rebuttal of sorts?
No, the cerebral's the way to put it, man. Nick Nurse said during the season, there's guys who know where an offensive rebound is going before everyone else. Mm-hmm. And that's how Dennis Rodman made his money. As much as he claimed it was, he just knew where the ball was going a half beat before anyone else on the floor. And Scottie Barnes may not be that much before everyone, but he knows where the ball is going faster. And that is a huge advantage.
Chunking, neural processing, neuroscientific jargon that I know, not just related to basketball. I haven't heard one guy use these three terms 6 times and only use them now. But anyway, to defense, right? And this is where the on-offs come in. Scottie was provided a decent floor offensively. He didn't space the floor, but he still did enough that the Raptors offense...
This is where you're wrong. Defensively, he was above average for Toronto on-offs. Offensively is where he tanked his on-offs.
So here, I was going to say that was the case for the first half of the season. But this is what he inverted halfway through. And
okay. Oh, that was.
Yeah, so anyway, he was providing that floor for the first half, and then he was absolutely destructive for the first little while defensively. I often refer to it as astronaut tendencies. He's floating out in space a lot of the time. And the free roam, like make those reads, you're making reads as a Raptors defender more so than a lot of other schemes. Scottie really struggled with those reads and the freedom that came with them, and the freedom that came with his role where the Raptors would send him out there to guard players that he, quite frankly, had little to no chance of actually stopping at the point of attack and in isolation. He was, I would say, well below average as a point of attack defender for a lot of this season. And especially when they put him on bursty guards, that was a recipe for disaster. But that inverted, and the offense, when it really started to hum with Pascal, and Scottie was going through the rookie wall thing and was also trying to find where does he fit in, then that started to drop off. But his defense really towards the end of the year started to catch up as well, to the point that, as you were saying, it came around that it was a positive. That was a huge development that it came around in that way.
It was insane. And it wasn't anything spectacular, which is what we were talking about offensively. His block rate, his steal rate, defensive rebounding rate, foul rate, nothing was crazy. Nothing popped. He just smartened up, right? He rotated better. He used his length better. He became a solid defender. I would have liked to have seen better shot blocking with his length and with Toronto's scheme. That's fine. That comes, wings aren't usually good shot blockers. That's like a normal thing. But it's almost the opposite of what we were talking about on offense. On offense, the spectacular was the stuff, and the foundation's what needs to get filled in. On defense, the foundation is there. He showed that. The spectacular will come.
He had a month where he shot like 40% from deep on like 4 attempts a game,
That was
and he was hitting like 45% on pull-ups. It's that rookie stuff, right? Accessing the spectacular when you can't access the floor. Classic rookie stuff. Defensively, do you expect role change at all heading into next season? You talked about, they used him as drop. Do you expect next season for him as a defender to still be them as interested in collecting data, in just like inserting him in weird situations?
Yeah, I mean, that's when you say role change, like what role did he have? It changed so much, right? And so, I mean, hopefully they have enough data. They can just say, this is what you're good at, go do that. Which is, I mean, let me ask you that. Let's say they have enough data and they say, this is what you're good at, go do that. What is it that they ask him to do in that case?
Okay. What Pascal is good at is roughly what I identify as what Scottie is good at. And so, you talked about this, how the Raptors defensively wanted to position Pascal based on how they used him in matchups as a guy who's off ball in a lot of these actions. So he can problem solve and he can gum up everything with, he reads the floor really well defensively. He can stop something and then get back to where he needs to be so that it's not a gamble. It's just really great. I don't think Scottie's there, but Scottie is well on his way to being that sort of guy. But as we know, Scottie is also a guy who he'll say, let me guard the best player. And Pascal doesn't really have that. Pascal will step out on the best player 6 times over the course of a game in a switch, and he'll get 5 stops. But Pascal isn't going to say, let me take him 94 feet. But Scottie asked for that stuff, is unsuccessful. And so I wonder how much of, what he wants to do, that good professional NBA ego that drives his greatness, at least in part, how much of that do the Raptors kind of cave on and allow? And how much better does Scottie get at that stuff, guarding those types of players? But I think as a recovery guy, as a rotational guy, particularly, we talked about Chris Boucher, these long rotations and these long contests and help over and stuff like that. I do like Scottie in those situations as well.
Second in closeouts in the league?
Yes. So what do you think of that answer?
No, I completely agree with you. And he did have some striking successes against stars, right? Where Nick Nurse said to media after the game, look, he said, I want to guard the guy, and I let him guard him. I think that happened against, Did that happen against Bradley Beal in one game?
Yeah, it did happen against Beal. Yes.
Uh,
If that's the game where the quote came from Nick Nurse, I
yeah,
believe. Yes. Because that was when I was in Toronto. It
right.
was yes. Yeah.
So yeah, when you were at the game, right? When you were media, and so there
Halcyon
was,
days.
yeah, exactly. More to come, hopefully. Knock on wood. But it was like let's not just say let's not ignore those heights, because yeah, I mean, he did get blown by a lot, uh, especially early in the season. But when he did that, machismo NBA star thing, I'm going to guard the guy, he did have some impressive moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's. Do you have anything else you want to say about Scottie Barnes before we move on?
Is he going to be Scottie Pippen? Is he going to be Magic Johnson? Or is he going to be Giannis Antetokounmpo?
You know I hate these, dude.
I hate it so much. He's going to be Scottie Barnes.
Yeah.
I'm the only Ty
understand.
Crane.
Hey, yeah, that's right.
We can leave it at that.
I respect Ty Crane, but that's it, right? Is that Scottie is so unique that we started talking about his hips,
Yeah.
like, and Magic Johnson didn't do the hips,
Who
and
had the
neither did
hips? Nobody has the hips.
Giannis doesn't actually. Giannis is a train,
He
and you
never
can
squares his hips.
and it can swivel, it can change tracks if somebody says, "Kate, here we go," but he will not swivel those hips. He is just like, he has a line to the basket that he follows, and he works in these straight lines, where Scottie works in these whirling dervishes. But yeah, he's Scottie Barnes. That's my takeaway. Is just like, I
No,
don't
great
expect.
answer. Great answer.
Yeah, thanks. Pascal Siakam, and then Fred, and then we'll work ourselves down the line.
What is this going to be a 4-hour pod, by the way? Because you know that we're going to spend more time talking about Yuta Watanabe than like Scottie Barnes.
No. Yuta, I love Yuta, but he did not have the season he wanted to have, unfortunately. We might not even revisit Yuta after this conversation. No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, Pascal Siakam. Yes.
Superstar. Full-fledged, team lifting, scheme defining, game breaking superstar.
He was pretty good. He did his thing. Okay, so let's start on defense. We already said his role earlier on.
Talked a lot about his defense.
Yeah, so let's I'll let you sum up his defense, and then we'll move to the other side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, really unique defender. Toronto bases its entire scheme around his identity as a defender. Also phenomenal in switch, phenomenal rim protector. Really improved his defensive rebounding. Toronto had a need, and he stepped up. That's what Kawhi Leonard did in that championship run. Toronto was having a lot of trouble grabbing rebounds. Kawhi just said, "Fine, I'll do it." Pascal had that same. He flipped the switch where he said, "We need this. I'll go do it." I mean, he was unbelievable. Great steal rate. Like, man, just so incredible. So incredible.
Mm-hmm. And for anybody who's wondering, like, okay, so you're just talking about Pascal an hour into this podcast. With our idea with this podcast is obviously that this is
your idea. I'm just,
hey, this is the season in review. People should be able to listen to this like 2 months from now, and it shouldn't be dated. They should be able to get everything they want from this podcast. Basically, I'm doing a podcast with Sean Woodley about storylines, which is like,
nice.
That covers the other aspect of it, and we'll have draft stuff and all that. But yes, Pascal Siakam on offense. You and I have had this conversation on this podcast a few times. We've had it elsewhere. We've written about it. But his offense, where do you think the biggest improvements came this season?
Probably decision making.
Mm-hmm.
I think he didn't improve that much at any individual skill in terms. He wasn't that much more efficient at the rim. He was better, but not he has been this efficient at the rim in the past. He wasn't that much more efficient with his jumper from the mid-range. His passing has been excellent before. But what he was best at is saying, this is what needs to happen now. Interpreting which skill to pull out of the bag at which moment. And his frequency shifted from long mid-range to short mid-range. And he is one of the league's 5 or 10 best in the short mid-range, I would say. That, that running, floating push shot through contact is one of the definitive shots in the league, right? Do you remember NBA 2K something? Did you ever play 2K?
You say 2K something. It has to be specific because I played 2K every
Okay, you
day.
play. Okay, so I did not. I played maybe 2K11 was like the last year
Did you
I
play it
played.
on a computer?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't run 2K on computers anymore. I have like a cheap. Anyway, but every guy had one shot that was theirs, but only the best. Like Steph Curry's jump shot was his thing. And, LeBron James had a gather that was like unique to him. Siakam's like that running, pushing, floating thing he does is a definitive, like you could show me a silhouette of someone doing that, and that's obviously Pascal Siakam. And maybe that, of all things, of all skills other than decision making, that I think is the biggest step forward.
That's a really good point. Something I said in my preview for the 76ers series was Pascal shot 60% from the field from 4 to 14 feet in the season series against the 76ers, in which every time he played, Joel Embiid played.
Yeah.
So those are 11 footers over Joel Embiid a lot of the time. Pascal shot 57% on those in the series against the 76ers. When the air was pent up and everybody in the building held it, like he released it. Like he hit the button that made everything okay. He was the release valve for the offense when they needed to get something going. He trundled his way or, trundled his way into the lane aggressively against smaller guys or finessed his way into spots against bigger guys and got to that spot, as Joel Embiid said, not the rim. And he said, okay, if not the rim, I'm not going to go in there to miss against you. I'm going to take the harder shot and rely on my skill as a player, and I'm going to make it. And just also for reference, 41% on long mid-range too. Pascal, yes, especially in a playoff series, especially without spacing. That is really, really nice. So Pascal took a situation both in the playoff series and this season offensively that for most players that don't have a three-point shot, and you can fault him for that, but also you have to consider his size and skill set and how many players, if he had a pull-up three like Donovan Mitchell, who the hell is this guy really? Some players have to have limitations. Like Giannis doesn't have a three-point shot either, right? And Pascal isn't Giannis, forgive me. But Pascal was in an inhospitable situation and brought his blanket, he brought his electric blanket, brought his favorite pillow, and he just cozied up in the inhospitable part of the floor and he made his bed in it. And it was a comfortable bed,
We talked earlier, you put any other coach in charge of this team, how many wins do they get? You put any other superstar in charge of this offense, asked to do the same thing, and how many points do they score? Not a lot would be able to do what Pascal Siakam did. And even phenomenal players who are extraordinarily successful in their own habitats, in their own climates, would find the barren wasteland in which Pascal not just clawed survival from, but in which he thrived. They would find it. They're crushing.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, right? This is when we talked about all NBA, when we wrote our pitches about, hey, this guy should be all NBA. We both talk about, look at this short mid-range shot making. Look at the way he scores. That's dictated not by his game because he wants to get to the bucket. He made his whole career on getting to the bucket, and then his team said, "We can't do that for you anymore." And he said, "What can you do for me?" And they said, "We can give you the ball." That's it. You know what I mean?
That's the quote right there.
Right? And he made an all NBA season out of it after he made a very underrated season out of Aaron Baines and co as his partners down low. So Pascal Siakam has had a tough go of it, and especially from media for a while, elsewhere and in-house, right? Just a really tough go, fan base up and down, and he came to an all NBA season. And the three-point shooting can improve, the passing on the move can improve. There's just so many aspects of his game. He's so adaptable. He makes great reads. I don't think he's hit his ceiling because
the biggest source of improvement is the context changing, though.
Yeah.
Right? It's
absolutely.
him getting a tent to put up. It's him having someone just, plow a little bit of smooth crops. No, but having some shooter. You put some shooting around him, he's got, like, his efficiency just skyrockets, right? Like, he has a lot of ceiling to hit individually, but also context-wise.
You put some shooters in there, a little bit of bone.
Baby,
Man,
you got a stew
going. Yeah. So anyway, Pascal got the stew going, and he did it
just
the
a couple
same
of
way.
consenting adults getting a stew going.
Exactly. And he did the same way Carl Weathers did, in a grubby manner. But yeah, that's Pascal, just a fantastic player. Honestly, if you're feeling like this conversation on him underwhelmed, just type in like Louis Zatzman, Pascal Siakam, or Samson Folk, Pascal Siakam. All of our pieces will turn up, and we both just did mountains of work on him this year. Yeah. So Fred VanVleet, the bet on yourself, the guy who fought through hell and then had the second level of hell hoisted onto him by his beaten body. Yeah.
Fred is my
all-star. Yeah.
I've been a Fred. I've been Fred pilled acolyte for a long time. I was calling him an elite defender long before anybody else was.
Stamped it.
And I think at times I've overshot his significance, and you have been there to sort of pull me back to solid ground at times. But the beginning of this year, the first 2-3 months, October, November, December, January, 3 months, he was superstar level. He was almost as good then as Pascal was in the last few months. His shooting changed the entire texture of the team. His hands were so heavy, unspeakably heavy, just magnets for the ball. You know how the Raptors used magnets to make Kawhi Leonard's shot go in? They then took those magnets and put them in Fred VanVleet's hand. That's where they live now, in his hands. He really improved as a passer. He actually improved as a finisher a lot until the knee thing. He tested the waters in terms of floaters and then said, nope, not for me. He was unbelievable. And it's sports. So guys' success or failure is not heartbreaking, but whatever the sports equivalency of heartbreaking, it's how I felt about Pascal's incredible steps forward and successes being sapped by that knee injury. That's how I felt.
Mm-hmm. Before I respond with what I think about Fred, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the possession battle, which we won't talk about, but listener, the first person to get quotes on this and write about this was Joe Wolfond.
Yeah.
Yes, just type in Joe Wolfond possession battle, and I believe on Google, and his piece and the podcasts we've done on it, Joe and I, will come up, but you won't have the full picture of the Raptors season without the context of knowing that the Raptors were gamifying the possession stuff. But
yeah,
Fred,
which is what we were talking about when we talked about offensive rebounding and turnovers. We never actually said the words, but I think we worked it in.
We didn't want to get the copyright claim from Joe, but this way we avoid it. Yeah. So yes, Fred, pick and roll. So I want to talk about, because I expect Fred to be healthy for, so I'll do this. I expect Fred to be healthy But the back end of the season, post-injury, was a guy who couldn't turn the corner, wasn't able to leverage his jump shot as much, and thus the extra playmaking, shot making that accompanied his all-star run was gone. His point of attack defense was affected, and Fred on the court was a much worse player than he's meant to be. And that was something that was a byproduct of playing probably too many minutes and a little bit of bad luck with body breakdown and stuff like that. But the good stuff, Fred VanVleet, as Louis was saying, a guy who, he says I brought Louis back to earth, but Louis was right about Fred when Fred is healthy. Fred is a guy who I never thought would have an avenue to above average pick and roll play, but he found that on his way to becoming a first-time All-Star. Not only was he able to change how teams defended him, causing more switches and, dictating that teams pay more attention to him, they have to load up on his possessions more often, but he was also significantly more capable of punishing drop defenses because he was more aggressive pulling up from three. He was more aggressive pulling up from mid-range, and he coupled all of that with much better playmaking, aggressive playmaking without jacking up the turnovers. He passed his teammates into more layups than he ever has, and he was shooting 50+% on catch and shoot threes. So much so that the best shots in the league were looking like a Giannis dunk, a Mitchell Robinson dunk, a Gobert lob, and like a VanVleet three. Just sure-footed things, and then a long bomb, even higher than Curry. And so Fred, at one point in the season, was just such an overwhelming force of grit, tenacity, and shot making with a little bump of playmaking that he became an all-star. And a lot of the writers who I admire most, the way they cover the league, how much film they work into their life, a lot of them were saying this guy could be an all-NBA candidate.
Yep.
And that obviously was stolen away, but I think it's reasonable to expect him to come back in a similar fashion for the start of next season. So Fred, healthy, without anything robbed from him, was an all-star for sure, but a guy who's going to punch up at all NBA status. And that is of significant consequence headed into next season.
A lot of metrics had him as like a top 5 guy in the league when he was healthy.
Metrics.
Which, look, I also dislike single numbers because I like talking about hips. I like small, minute basketball. We like as narrow and specific as possible because that's understandable. Using one number to describe value or basketball makes no sense. So I withdraw my comment about metrics. But the passing I wanted to get into a little bit. For a long time, his passes were either perimeter passes for a three, which guys hit, it was good, or a little bit of pick and roll passing for long twos, right, to Serge Ibaka. And he was a 5-6 assist a 6 assist per game guy, which is good doing that. But he added much more high calorie passing, like real impressive stuff. His ability to see lanes at his size is incredible. We see lanes on the broadcast that most players can't see because we're looking over everything. Fred VanVleet's looking under. He can't see. He just sees arms. He sees bodies that are towering over him. And yet he finds really impressive passes. He improved as a lob passer significantly, as did Precious improve as a lob catcher. The bet on yourself is not just grit. It is skill, right? He is incredible at taking skills and making them into strengths. And one thing that made his season bother me so much was a lot of his game was built on what he struggled against Philadelphia with in 2019. They ran him off the line, so he added a deep three. They clogged the lane, so he found ways to pass to the rim, right? This was more Boston in 2020, but they just said anyone can guard him and sing. No one switch, no one rotate, keep the shell completely intact. And so he added a mid-range shot, right? So much of what he's added was because of those struggles. And then to struggle again despite adding the solutions, having the solutions in hand, it's got to be frustrating for him.
Yeah. And also, like, this is, talk about minute, but a lot of the best guards are comfortable being in the middle of the floor with a live dribble.
Yeah.
And they don't have to be in motion out of the middle of the floor. They can kind of just contain their little bubble and continue to see how the defense pulls from where, and then lanes open up adjacent to the bucket rather than the out playmaking from outside to outside that Fred's game is kind of built upon for a long time. He had a lot more outside in and inside in playmaking than years before. And a lot of that was comfortability with his own physicality. You talk about these passing lanes. The strength creation is the term we use, where it's not really skill based, but a player uses their strength to open up access to parts of the floor that they wouldn't otherwise have. Jimmy Butler, Scottie Barnes are two guys who, the peak of strength creation at the wing position, Jimmy, and then a burgeoning young talent like Scottie who uses strength creation a lot of the time, bullying your way around the court. Fred was a lot better at bullying because he despite being this plucky, super jacked up little guard and having a super low center of gravity, that was reserved for the defensive side of the
Plucky,
floor.
super jacked up little guard.
Yeah, right. And having low center of gravity, he was able to use that to weaponize that center of gravity defensively, similar to OG. But Fred, like OG, would always get knocked off his center on offense, and we saw that in a lot of off balance finishing in however many years. But now, taking kind of a page out of the Kyle Lowry book, always staying strong, bumping guys who are way bigger, and using those bumps to manipulate the coverage and all that kind of stuff. That's where Fred improved a lot too. But that has to come back with more explosiveness, where he's getting deeper in the paint, and players who are bigger are catching up to where he is. They're off balance, he's on. Those bumps are more effective than when he's slow and they're kind of staying on pace with him.
Yeah.
OG Anunoby.
OG Anunoby.
I'm an OG acolyte. You for Fred, I for OG. OG Anunoby, a disappointing year for some, because a person like me wrote this big thing before the season saying, if OG is healthy and the team is
Pull up
good,
threes.
yeah, if OG's healthy, if the team is good, he'll make an all-star team. The healthy thing didn't happen, and the team wasn't very good during his best stretch. And he also had to acclimate to Pascal Siakam acclimating and Scottie Barnes acclimating. And Scottie Barnes, as it turns out, is a guy who Scottie doesn't need to acclimate. Scottie will just take. And Pascal was too good for anybody to take away from him. And that became increasingly apparent. So OG became the guy who, at the start of the year, these heavy isolation possessions, a little bit more pick and roll, that went to the wayside, and he fell back to doing a lot of what he was good at and a lot of what made him really important to the Raptors. And that's in the framework of their set actions, spacing out so that the health of the play is much better, that the defense has to kind of, it obliges the defense to guard him, that he became a post hub because Nick Nurse recognized he was good there, but it was the easiest way to assure that he got the ball in positions of strength. And OG also, a lot of his above the break actions kind of turned into nothing because his pull-up three was basically non-existent. And that was something we saw pop off a little bit in the series against the 76ers. And then he hit pull-up threes, and then immediately he was working in the pick and roll and getting downhill, getting to the bucket. He looked incredible, but it wasn't something that was dependable throughout the season. Health, changing roles, trying to find his way. His strengths never wavered, but what he was trying to achieve did. And that put him in a very interesting position offensively.
His 3-point percentage looked like it dipped, but that's because he added almost 2 pull-up threes a game, which he made it sub 30%. His catch and shoot 3-point rate remained 40%. He
Ironclad. He'll be there every season.
And it's consistent game to game. He has very few down shooting games. It's crazy. But he, I would say, took steps forward in things he was already good at. the things he wasn't good at before remain weaknesses. Is that fair?
Yeah. That is the perfect way to frame it, I think. He improved. And for the people who are paying
Yep.
attention, that's really meaningful because for the people who care about team building, you have to consider cap, and OG's on an awesome contract, so like who cares? But if you want, and also for people who like development and get bored when players stagnate, which is a lot of people, I don't think he stagnated either. So there's that sense of linear progression still going that allows people to, you know, put their handle on Twitter as OG MVP or OG season or whatever, like
Yeah.
to fuel all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I also wrote a piece pretty early in the year about OG, following Jimmy Butler, Giannis, or Jaylen Brown. These guys who sort of did not score a lot in their rookie season and went on to become all-star wings. And it was clear even then that if he was going to do it, it would be a different way. Because even that early in the season, his pull-up shot was nil. He was scoring quite poorly. Handling in the pick and roll, but he had all these other avenues to success that those guys didn't even that early in their careers. And I do still think there's a lot of latent ability.
Mm-hmm.
I think he should become a competent pull-up shooter. It seems, I'm not a shot doctor by any means or a doctor, but it seems like he lacks flexibility. And when he's set his catch and shoot shot, the kinetic energy is very clean through his body. When he's pulling up, you need to be able to rotate. Steph Curry is the best example of that. He's the most flexible shooter in history. And OG, his kinetic energy is wonky when he pulls up. He doesn't move it smoothly through his core.
Do you want the biomechanics answer?
Yeah. Give me the real thing, because I'm just
which I don't have, but
why would you
polar.
why would you show it to me?
No,
if
no,
I
no,
can't
no.
have it?
I have it, but it's not my own wisdom. It's
Okay.
not my own insights. It's Polar, the biomechanics expert of NBA Twitter, who is an MD in his spare time and a full-time Twitter poster about biomechanics. Is a doctor, yes, and a shot doctor, as it turns out. But OG with really long legs, it creates this aspect where this is something Scottie also is affected by. It creates this aspect where the really small movements, like preparing your feet in these dynamic pull-up jumper situations, it's really hard to get on balance, especially when your legs are long. Think about chopsticks or stilts, right? And that's why OG is so dominant in defense, where defense you don't have to really be short ever. You can be long because you're covering ground, and you really can't cover too much ground. And so OG being dynamic and trying to get his feet under himself for all these dynamic like pull-ups and stuff really affects the gather, and it makes it truncated. You can see the hitch a lot of the time. And that's why his go-to isn't like a dribble into a pull-up. It's always a step back into a pull-up because the step back gets to be long and his gather is the stop. And that's how it changes. Whereas like you look at like Jason Tatum or something, or Kyrie Irving is a really good example. Kyrie's feet can be splayed out any which way and he'll still be squared up top and he can still get to his spot. OG isn't flexible like that. He's not fluid like that. So that's how it affects it there. But set shooting and like, using the drop dribble into the gather and all that kind of stuff, when he gets square, as you said, very rare to see a bad shooting game because he's just so quality as a shooter. The form is great, the transfer is great, all that kind of stuff. But the dynamism of pull-up shooting is really tough for him to overcome. So it'll just require him getting better at getting to his spots, which he can because he's really strong and he's really overwhelming. But all that stuff,
8 hours a day in yoga,
something like
right?
that. Yeah.
Otherwise, I mean, some steps he improved as a rim attacker, off the ball or with the ball, off a rotation. Really efficient creator around the rim. I mean, he did take some strides, but still a sleeping dragon. We talked before the season about dragons. We said quite correctly, Scottie ain't gonna sleep. That man is either a dragon or he's not a dragon. He ended up being a dragon.
Dragon confirmed. Yes.
OG Anunoby still sleeps, but
Yeah.
maybe Dragon.
You talked about those latent abilities, and when we think about, once again, OG for the duration of him sharing a team with Pascal Siakam, OG has been a better passer on the move than Pascal Siakam has.
Yeah.
And you want to talk about like assist percentage relative to role or relative to position. Once again, OG Anunoby above the average. He's in the higher percentiles. That is really meaningful because that indicates that he reads the floor in motion and he has a good idea of reading advantage for himself and others, which is it creates that duality. When he's on ball, he recognizes cutters. When he's off ball, he recognizes when to cut. This means he's really good adapting to the players around him and should be really good in like second side action, all that kind of stuff. It's just a more fluid dribble, a more fluid pull up, continues to ratchet up how special a player he can be. And defense, he just rocks on defense.
He's Meshuggah.
Yeah.
It's
Meshuggah.
crazy.
Yeah.
I told you there was going to be Yiddish. Defensive, I mean, he is the archetype, right? That's when anybody, a fan, a casual, or a diehard, when you say what's an elite defender in the modern NBA, you picture a guy like OG Anunoby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pascal Siakam is too cerebral. It's too nuanced and academic. Even though in many ways he is as capable a defender as Anunoby. But Anunoby, his defense just hits you in the face how incredible it is.
Well, he hunts dribbles too. Pascal doesn't hunt dribbles. Like OG he'll pluck you.
But this is what I mean. They have different strengths. And
Mm-hmm.
Pascal's or Anunoby's strengths are about as evident as defensive strengths can be, unless you're
totally.
Rudy Gobert. Right? He pick sixes every game. Find me a game without a pick six from Anunoby. You can't do it. He hunts dribbles. Not only does he force misses from anybody, guards, wings, forwards, guys don't even shoot against him because he keeps them so off balance. He's so mobile and strong and long. Attempt rates against him plummet, let alone make rates. He is so good at defense.
In a league where the best players can hit shots over great defenders, those players aren't taking shots over Anunoby. That is as succinct as it gets. He's tremendous. Trent Jr.
Great offense always beats great defense, unless the defender's OG Anunoby.
Yeah, something like that. Trent Jr. I'll let you start. Trent.
I'm going to push you right under the bus, right off the bat.
Sure.
With both of us. I'm coming with you. I'm dragging you under the bus with me. I think we were both a little low on Trent coming into the season. Not because of his offense. I think we were both right about his offensive limitations, which he made small but tangible strides.
Yep.
So let's start there because the bus pushing comes on the defensive end where he made huge improvements. We'll get to that. Offensively, I mean, his shooting remains phenomenal. For large stretches of the season, he was Toronto's best shooter. Just because he is so good pulling up or off the catch. He, I think, got a little bit better creating for himself in the mid-range. Even though the numbers don't really bear that out, I still believe it. He was at least more willing to get to the rim, try to create for himself. And even though he wasn't very efficient there, willingness does matter. And there were a few games where he actually turned schemes on their heads because he was able to blow by and get some layups. And a creator for teammates out of the pick and roll. He actually made real headway there through some nice lobs, some good sprays. So, by and large, if you say Gary Trent Jr. 21-22 season versus Gary Trent Jr. 2021 season, offensively looks about the same. But beneath that veneer of ossification, you have real nuggets of improvement.
I also think he was adapting to role because he was undoubtedly better with the Raptors in 2021-22 than he was with the Raptors in 2020-21. He had a really, really rough Like he had a hot week of shooting with the Raptors, but a lot of the other offensive process was pretty gnarly. Like it did not go well. And
It's
it's
a hard
because
team to adapt to.
that's right. But it is also a team that is set up to accept an adapted version of Gary Trent. And by that we mean when we talked about Pascal, this team will give you nothing, only the ball. Gary Trent wants the ball, and they give it to him, right?
You ain't good. What's the Magic Johnson thing? You ain't
Oh,
gonna get it.
I'm not gonna be here. Yeah,
Yeah, but the ball, I'm not gonna be in Gary Trent's hands.
yes, yeah. I'm gone. I am flung towards the hoop. And so Gary, I thought the most impressive. I talked about this with Joe Wolfond for our end of regular season pod, but the most impressive thing about
You're
Gary,
potting with people without me?
yeah, I didn't want you to find out this way. I'm really sorry, dude. But Gary was able to turn it downhill more often in high leverage moments. And now this is the conversation that Zarar and I had about Gary prior to the season, where I was talking about him, this feast or famine version of a player because he's so reliant on jump shots. And so Zarar was correct in saying that you should expect to see some things change for Gary, for him to improve. That's absolutely correct. But he also was like, when he talked about DeMar DeRozan as an analog for Gary, I said, well, DeMar got in the paint. And, we disagreed because I thought just getting in the paint is something that's important.
Yes.
That's where Gary he got into the paint in higher leverage situations with the Raptors than otherwise. So when the teams kind of loaded up late in games, he started turning it downhill. The finishing is not completely there, but it means that he can add that element to the Raptors offense. We saw it actually probably the first time with Pascal and Gary was December 28th against the Philadelphia 76ers, where they went pick and roll or dribble handoff with Gary on ball and Pascal off of it to drag Embiid out. Very mixed results for Gary, but it's something they got to go to, and Fred wasn't there.
It's a nice late clock option, right? You
Right.
have to have things that not every possession is a Trae Young pick and roll. You have to
Right.
have some, you have to win some mediocre poker hands, and Gary Trent pick and rolls turned into that.
That's right. And that's the biggest thing about Gary is that with the Raptors, they say, "Can you win us the mediocre hands?" Quite often. They'll give him the grenade, like he gets I said he was the world's best grenadier. And
Great piece.
yeah, thank you. And that was like, that's something he's really good at. He was their best isolation player by points per possession. He had success in the pick and roll, as you alluded to. So there were meaningful steps taken, even if the box score per game numbers like field goal percentage and points per game and assists per game, those improvements seem either non-existent or quite modest.
That's the first time in an hour and a half pod about a team that either of us has mentioned a box score stat.
Hey, it's not so bad, we don't care about no box score in here. But anyway, you wouldn't, if you were just somebody who looked at like basketball reference pages and you scrolled down, you would say that Gary Trent Jr., you would probably say he's plateaued, actually.
Yes.
If you're just doing that kind of analysis. However, he is not. And that is especially poignant when we consider the other side of the ball. And to quote Ken Birch, quote, "I've never seen a guy, just be like good at defense after being bad at defense." End quote. Well, Cam, very succinct, but also very correct. Gary achieved some things on the defensive end of the floor this year.
He kept a weakness, which is he loved to freelance, loved to gamble. And as often happens, people who love to gamble can end up covered in their own filth, in the gutter, not knowing what they did the night before. That was the equivalent of what some possessions happened. Many possessions for the Raptors.
Don't let what Louis just said to you sway you from the 18,000 gambling ads you're getting on your cable TV right now watching sports, okay?
Hey, all of our money in sports within 1 year is all going to be from gambling. So, before our overlords come, which could be any day now, I'm going to get my shot in. But that weakness aside, Clint Eastwood sure loved to gamble in all of his movies, but when he was sober and making clean decisions, he could do some damage too. And that was Gary, right? He didn't have that last year. He was very poor on defense. He gave very little. This year, he just ripped the ball away from everyone. He dug into dribbles, ridiculous steal rate, and a ridiculous steal rate on the ball. Just he poked everything. You know, man. And how much does that matter for a team like the Raptors who couldn't score in the half court anyway?
He continuously wowed me because there was, I think it was game 6 where he rotated over, or game 5, and he fouled Joel Embiid. And it occurs to you when you see Gary react to a foul, you know what it looks like when Pascal fouls somebody. You know what it looks like when Fred fouls somebody. Precious, foul. Chris, Gary doesn't foul. And he's still like atop the steals leaderboards. He does, like, he'll give up lanes when he's gambling as far as like passing lane stuff.
Yeah.
But as far as on ball,
he's very good.
The mistakes come in like screen navigation and, you know, blow by here and then. But if he's trying to pluck, he will not send you to the line. He will not send you to side out. He will steal it. Yeah.
It's not Fred VanVleet. It's not heavy hands.
No.
It's nimble. It's like, you know,
Costanza
anime style fighting where the fighting is so fast that you can't even, it's the Matrix. That's how he steals balls. If Fred steals with power, Gary steals with speed. And man, what a weapon. To go from a zero tool defender to that is unbelievable.
As you know, I have memes that I
I have memes.
That are associated with players. For Precious, I stopped using it because it turns out he is a genius. But for Precious, a long time, it was this split screen of this person saying, "I am a genius," and then immediately under that it says, "Oh no." And that was a Precious possession on offense for some time. But for Gary, it's the meme of, you know, the woman looking at George Costanza's hands and saying they're magnificent. And I truly felt that way about Gary's hands. I was mesmerized by his ability to pickpocket people without offering any of the downside. And, you know, there are some downsides to the defense. I talked about this with Joe Wolfond. I would grade him as slightly above average as the defender, or average. I wouldn't, but that's already such an achievement to get to that spot. I don't know how much higher he swings. I don't know if he crashes back down to earth, whatever. But this very season, I think he had a slightly positive defensive season. That rules to go from where he was to that, and largely based off of his just insane ability to generate turnovers. But turnovers are important. There's a reason why, you know, a big part of the Raptors ethos was to gather as many of those bad boys as possible. And Gary was giving you these really low risk, high reward possessions all the time. So that was the biggest part of his defense, obviously. But you know, some of the blitzes, some of the doubles that he came and was a part of was also an improved aspect of his defense too. So that was super great to see.
And in high leverage moments, aside from game 6, a lot of his weaknesses did disappear. You know, games 4 and 5, which Toronto won, he was better than average defensively. He was actually quite spectacular. And that was against James Harden targeting him, against Tyrese Maxey trying to blow past him. And so, you know, he had some moments where it wasn't high highs and low lows balancing each other out. He had some moments where it was high highs with very few downsides. And he is 22 years old? 23 years old. Really, really incredible season for him. Better than either of us expected. He was one of Toronto's most important players in terms of on-off rates, which I would not have expected coming into the year. And just a great story all around, I think, for him.
Yeah. An absolute success of a season for him and the organization. And so much so that everybody immediately, because offense catches the eyes and steals catch the eyes, like Gary, especially towards the end of January, where he had that run of 30 plus games, right?
Tied to Mars' streak.
Right. And was dipping his toes into 40 plus games too. Gary provides you the sexy aspect of basketball always. Honestly, and whether it's the leg tats, whether it's like the really nice eyes, the beard
Oh,
that
you mean
contours.
literally? You're not talking basketball.
I'm talking basketball. Just give me a second. Give me a second, okay? Whether it's the beard that contours his face nicely or how he always smiles when he shoots, whatever it is, he gives you steals, he gives you off the dribble shot making, and he makes it like rain from downtown. All of that means that he is a very visually appealing player to a large group of people.
That's the turn.
And yes, and that means that everybody immediately was like seeing he is a usage player, if you know what I mean. He's going to use the possession defensively or offensively. And that means that he's always mixed up in outcomes. We talk about Pascal and how his best outcome defensively is just getting a guy to move off the ball, and then the ball swings to a place where the defense gets to catch up, and it's like, wow, Pascal saved a possession that otherwise would have been this great thing. But that's not on the box score, and that's not something that people kind of clock. Gary operates in the clock vicinity. You will
Very
clock
clockable.
you clock everything he does. And so everybody immediately was like, how much are we going to have to pay this guy to keep him around, even though we just signed that extension? Because it is kind of a funky 2-year player option extension. Yeah. So, but just a great season, Gary. Proved
Yeah.
me wrong in a number of ways, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's, he doesn't care if he proves me wrong. No, who cares? But for him,
Congratulations to him, man.
yeah,
Like, really impressive.
yeah. Bench. Oh, wait. Well, just the bench trio: Precious, Boucher, Thad, and probably, sorry, listener, if you're a huge Thadjic Johnson fan, we probably won't give him as much time. But let's start with who we are pilled on.
I will quit this
Precious.
podcast right now if we don't give Thad enough time.
Hey, well, it's the ball's in your court, man. You talk about Thad till the cows come home if you want.
You said start with Precious?
Yeah.
We should have led this podcast with Precious.
Push and P.
I have never, ever seen a basketball player develop over one season, in season, the way I saw Precious Achiuwa develop this year.
I actually have so I was talking to my friend. Some of you may know him as the creator of the Ethical Hoops dialogue, a good friend T. And when we were talking about Scottie and Precious, he brought up that he thought they were equivalent finishers. And I was just like, what the hell are you talking about, man? And I went and looked at the stats. I was like, we're talking about like a 20% discrepancy, man.
Yeah, it's huge.
And he was like, hey, man, I'm just seeing the future right now. And T is also, very big on Precious. And he's like, I'm seeing the future right now. And then all of a sudden, Precious starts finishing everything in the bucket, even over Joel Embiid. And it's just like, you know what? Sometimes a person sees the vision. And T, from like the outset of the season, was like, yeah, Precious, I'm taking him top 3 in that redraft. Everybody's like, what do you mean top 3? And he's like, yeah, I see the vision, man. And then all of a sudden, he's an all defense level defender. And all of a sudden, he's taking Joel Embiid off the dribble. And all of a sudden, he's hitting every 3 under the sun. And you're just kind of like, what is progression really? What is anybody doing anything on the basketball court? Because he just is harnessing everything all at once.
You can break progression down into any number of smaller categories, right? It's not just skill progression. Skill progression might be the biggest, and his skill progression was excellent. His handle, his shooting, his finishing, his passing, his rotation, his contest, his verticality, everything skill-wise, boom, through the roof. You can get even smaller. His physical development was phenomenal. In his strength, his ability to take contact as an offender, keep his lines, or as a defender, bump people off their lines. Even beyond that, his kinetic development, his ability to bend his body in the way he so desires, might dwarf all the others. His stroke always looked good. He just started making it. But his body, early on, he looked gangly and awkward when he moved. He didn't really know what to do after he took a dribble when he probed. By the end of the season, he was taking, outrageous leaps of faith in his body, which he then was converting in midair. It was phenomenal how he was able to convert or improve his physical control of his limbs. Even deeper than that, his brain, his ability to think the game, to intentionally manipulate the defense with those skills, to rotate correctly, to be ahead of the ball, to use his speed to his advantage defensively. Up and down, no matter where you look, at no matter what skill on the basketball court, he took outrageous bites out of that apple. And he chewed what no one should have chewed, digested it, and turned it into an indispensable player by the playoffs.
It's so there was the steal that the Raptors got after Pascal doubled. Pascal got the outlet pass, and Precious got it, and he finished over Embiid. Now, when we think of OG Anunoby and how every single charge he takes when he jumps up is like hoisted by my own petard because his damn knee almost massacres anybody who dares step in his way. Precious, he took the same jump. The knee went up, and Embiid went up too. That knee did not make contact because he went up that way, and immediately his body, that knee drops out, the hips change in air, he extends with the left, and he finished over Embiid at the rim in transition. And that's the unique fluidity that Precious has at his size in that dynamic situation to float in between these situations. And this is a guy who couldn't catch lobs that hit his hands and were uncontested. And it just makes you well, damn, what is the point of projecting? What is the point of anything with these players when they're just going to they completely blow away any attempt to do so by just radically improving, and then it's there. And you're like, is it here for good? Like Scottie's 3-point shot wasn't there for good. Precious, is it here for good? Yeah, I'll do it on the biggest stage as well. The defense, the offense, the self-authoring version of offense too, right? All of it stuck around on the biggest stage and became a linchpin of how the Raptors succeeded. You said indispensable. That was correct.
Had the most dunks of any Raptor in that playoff series. He was blowing past people and crowning anyone. I think it's here for good. I don't think you can say he'll continue to improve at this rate, because then he would be the greatest basketball player ever known to man.
That's what we did with Pascal too. And that wasn't true. You just can't do that. You can do it slower, but you can't do that. Surely not.
All progression has a curve. And I know, because I love hobbies, pool, basketball, chess, and I'll do a hobby to death for hours and hours a day until that progression of development starts to tail off. And I'm saying, hold on, you're to tell me that to become a better pool player, I just need to hit 100 bank shots in a row? That's not as fun. To become a better chess player, I need to memorize 30 different openings. I don't even get to play the game anymore. So it tails off. I can tell you from experience. And at some point, his development will tail off. That's just what it means to do a thing on this earth. That has not happened yet.
Bountiful wisdom from Mr. Zatzman. But that's accurate. Defensively, let's get into a little bit more of the micro. So we talked about his pick and roll defense, his isolation defense. Which one of those two do you want to talk about? Because I think those are his two standout stuff.
Okay, I'll take isolation defense.
Roger.
I mean, everything we said for OG Anunoby, copy, paste.
He blows my mind, dude. This is actually, I wrote, I think at the very start of February, I was like, Precious is on a collision course with all defense.
Yes.
When it comes, it's coming. He's too good. And one of chief among the things that I highlighted and cited was watch this guy take bumps
From
from
Giannis, you said.
from Giannis, from Jimmy,
Yeah.
from Luka. These three guys bump everybody in the whole league off their lines. And Precious, for some damn reason, has this rare combination of balance, speed, and tenacity to hang with those guys, to take that bump, and he doesn't move.
I'm
All of
glue
them.
and you're rubber. You bump into me, I'm not going anywhere.
You just wonder, like, how does somebody do that? But he proved he could do it against a myriad of different players, and even that's why he was so instrumental in the regular season at playing Joel Embiid, because Joel Embiid bumps when he's not bumping. Joel Embiid is one of the most, Joel Embiid on the wrong end of like a terrible injury. Just Pascal is doing a normal move. The ball, it goes up, he makes the bucket, people collide. Joel Embiid makes it his business to collide as often as possible, because that is how he needs to. That is how you leverage your size.
Yeah, because
That
he's
is
the
how
biggest,
you
strongest
draw
guy.
fouls.
Yeah.
And he's an MVP level player. He's Hall of Fame. He's one of my favorite players in the league. And even he had trouble at times, not every time, because it's Joel Embiid, but he had trouble at times moving Precious Achiuwa. And that's why Precious Achiuwa stepping into guys, there's strength creation will not work against him. You can't bump him off his line. You can try and beat him to a spot, but he's quick too.
Will not work against him with the ball. Without the ball, he got bullied a little bit by Embiid.
Sure. Yes.
And if we're gonna point to any weakness, he had a poor game against Jokic. Kem Birch actually saved that game because I think Toronto ended up winning, where Jokic beat him to a spot and then toyed with him with his fakes and spins. And so, I mean, there is still improvement to be made, which is wild to say. Because I mean, I know that the point of this podcast is not to project forward. The point of this is to enjoy the season that just happened. But Precious Achiuwa, in the way he plays basketball, makes it almost impossible not to project forward. It is every part of you when discussing him is desirous of saying, what could this become? Like Scottie Barnes. But what he became this season was beyond what anyone could have possibly expected.
It was, yeah. And you want to talk about like who's the best defender for Nikola Jokic, and by points per possession, OG Anunoby ranked up there when the graphs came out, and that means that the Raptors' help principles were the best defender for Nikola Jokic, and just being able to throw length and stuff. So Nikola Jokic will eat everybody's lunch in isolation, except for maybe prime Chuck Hayes, and Chuck Hayes is going to say, some games he's going to hit the shots. Some games he's not going to hit the shots, but I'll be there regardless. And Jokic, Precious does not have the juice for a Jokic matchup, unfortunately. But that is the weakness, is like when Precious isn't able to overwhelm with his physicality and athletic gifts, then, the type of defenders who are very cerebral, who start reading the floor, who let their mind and their feel for the game do the work for them in a lot of these rotations. Marc Gasol is, Raptors fans who listen to this podcast, you'll identify with what that means. He's making moves that save him steps, and it's controlling the middle of the floor with as little motion as possible, that kind of stuff. Precious, does he have the size to get away with that, even if he did learn the game that way? Maybe not, but he also has to learn the game that way too. So as you say, like, ceiling as a defender can go much higher. I said I'd talk about pick and roll, so I'll do that now. The Raptors, so switch the pick and roll, it immediately goes into that isolation aspect that Louis and I talked about. So we can forget that. But the playing at the level of the screen, super, super impressive, because if a guy tries to turn the corner, he contains, he can bump them out, a la Chris Bosh with the Heat, straddle a guy until he's at the sideline. He can, he can blitz. As far as in drop, once again, he can contain, he can contest, and then he can recover to his man, and he can play high drop. He never really plays low drop, and why would he? So the high drop stuff is still really impressive, and I will cite it for the last time this season, but he was so good at playing pick and roll defense that Trae Young stopped running pick and rolls. I cite it too often. Everybody's probably annoyed, but I can't say it enough. That is a monumental feat to move the best pick and roll player in the NBA out of the play type that gives him his name and success. Sheesh, dude. They just didn't want Precious to be involved in the action, so they stopped doing it. And that's because he's so good at contain and recover. And that means that he's just an absolute menace in so many different variations of pick and roll. You can't do low drop, but you can basically do everything else. Blitz, switch to blitz, switch, drop, high drop. It's just, he was phenomenal.
He
He
blitzed
was
very
awesome.
well too. I mean, we talked a lot about his reactive defense, but his proactive defense was phenomenal as well.
Yeah. Boucher. Bonjour.
Oh man.
I'll let you take the lead.
Speaking about progression, Boucher took what was a very difficult season and a very difficult time for him. He talked about how difficult it was emotionally, mentally. His family turned off the games so they didn't have to watch him playing. He turned that around. He completely changed what he was doing on the floor for Toronto. So much so that he was the team's second best player in Game 6. They needed him on the floor. Every minute that he could be there, they need him against Philadelphia. It was a stunning turnaround. And it wasn't progression in the sense of Precious, where everything you look at is getting better. It was realizing what made him useful and recommitting to that, like second marriage to the same person, recommitment.
The renewal of the vows.
Renewal of the vows. Thank you. It was renewal of the vows where he said, I'm good at this, and this is the only thing I will do.
Yeah. Well, it's I think the easiest thing to identify is dunker spot cutting, pick and roll, rim running was what, and 3-point shooting.
He didn't even get any more pick and roll. They were like, you're not going to be on the ball at all. You're going to cut, you're going to space, and you're going to bomb rush the offensive glass.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I mean. Those two things, or those three things, those were the pillars of his breakout season.
Yeah.
And those things were not happening. And suddenly, as you say, the renewal of vows, he has to commit to these things that weaponize, length weaponized is Chris Boucher, right? So he has to find how to weaponize his length once again without being involved in these glamorous actions, let's say, for a big man. And he has to succeed in the unglamorous aspects of the court. And through film, through a dedication to reading the floor better, a player that you and I took umbrage with being called low IQ was suddenly a guy who is one of the best cutters on the Raptors, which has
very high IQ,
which has a team full of very good cutters, and also read the floor so well that he immediately became one of the best charge takers in the NBA. You do not get to those spots without reading the floor at a very high level. And Chris Boucher, who even the fan base had a tendency to, oh, this is dummy. Like they really leaned into that aspect of it. Like his mistakes were always that of like, bonehead, smack yourself. Yeah. No, this is a really, really smart, like his feel for the game, tremendous. He basically just had to make everything that succeeded from scratch, from impromptu, always choose the right point, flash yourself into a situation where you support other players and do it at the right time. Like, Jaime Lannister in Game of Thrones, when he's beefing up his cousin who he hardly knows and says, what is it when you're helping out a knight? What are you, a steward?
Yeah.
Right. And he's saying, oh yes, it's a gift, to not be there when you're supposed to not be there, to be there when you're needed. And Chris Boucher was the steward of the Raptors team. He was there whenever they needed the help side rotation. He was there when they needed a double at the baseline. He was there when they needed a cutter to come in off the strong side or the weak side or the 45. He was there. And he was there, Johnny on the spot, for however many offensive rebounds. He was there.
Well, I mean, defensively, it wasn't a renewal of the vows. It was just he made no errors of omission. He never.
And his most famous one wasn't actually his error.
The Delano Banton X out?
Which was probably viewed like 400,000 times on Twitter, but it wasn't his fault.
Yeah. Not to take pot shots, not to name names. Several media members criticized him for that. If you don't know what an X out is, I don't know what to tell you. He was a very, very intelligent defender. I mean, Thad Young ended up edging him out in defensive on-offs by the end of the regular season, but Boucher was second.
We were so close.
I was shocked that Thad Young was top. I mean, not that shocked. He was great, but Boucher, his defense was phenomenal. We already mentioned his rim protection. I would say he is top 5 corner closeout put the fear of God into shooters. He really blocks corner threes, like really blocks those shots. Mitchell Robinson blocks those shots. Became a better rebounder. Like you said, took charge. Just, I would say offensively, renewal of the vows. Defensively, real impressive improvement in many ways.
And is it beneficial? He's the beneficiary.
Yes.
The Raptors are the benefactor. I wrote this wrong in a piece this year. I screwed up. I inverted it improperly, and everybody.
Buddy, I'm your editor. You're saying that's my fault.
Yeah, you're my editor. What is it? But anyway, right, is that he is the beneficiary of the Raptors' new defensive verve. And it means that a lot of the mistakes that he would have otherwise made, that kinetic follow the ball, don't try and get back to your guy. Any mistake he made, he just kind of fell into those principles and fell in hard and said, hey, I'm really going to lean into this. And that's why, like, that X out, everybody's like, oh, it's like, no, he knew the scheme. He knows the scheme and he operates extremely well within it. That's what the coolest part is that he turned weaknesses into strengths under the house of the Raptors defensive framework.
You can tell when scheme is second nature. It's very clear when watching a player. Boucher, I would say for the first time in his career, knew the scheme without thinking.
Mm-hmm. Which is cool.
Which is amazing.
That's pretty
I'm
cool.
so happy for him. It's hard to watch players struggle because you care about them. Even, like, players are not numbers. And objectivity, even if it shouldn't be a goal, is relatively, even if it should be a goal, which who knows if that's true, is relatively impossible. And it's hard to see people struggle. And I'm very happy for him, for his family, that he was able to make this season such a success.
Damn right. Okay. Thaddeus Johnson, Thad Young, Thaddeus Young. The Raptors traded a first-round pick for him, and that made his acquisition somewhat controversial.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you. Actually, no, that's dumb. I don't want to do that. Let's just talk about his year. No, yeah, that's dumb. I don't want to do that. That's not an important conversation. That's me thinking about, like, Thad Young, his year. I'll let you start because, you're one of his biggest fans.
I was very disappointed.
Sorry, fans.
Fans? Everything TH. I was very disappointed with his start as a Raptor. I expected him to come in swinging, which was stupid of me because no one comes in swinging with this Raptors team. And he had, for a stretch there, I think first percentile offensive on-offs. Just the offense just plummeted because he is not used to read and react. That's not how
he's a set action king.
Yeah, that's never how he's played. And his game has changed dramatically over many years. I think he was at his best in Chicago as, like, the best short roll passer in the league. San Antonio, he never got a chance to do that or, like, play at all. And then Toronto, they have like 8 guys who need to be in the pick and roll, and he just didn't really get a shot. And his greatest strength was cast off on the wayside. And so how else did he add value? It took him time to figure it out. Well, he did it by forcing turnovers, handling in transition, throwing bounce pass dimes to cutters again and again and again. And just, I mean, he was going to figure it out. Everyone knew that. He is not just an on-court genius. He's supposed to be a like an academic genius as well, is what I've heard. And
He plays Connect 4 with Rajon Rondo.
I don't know that story.
Oh, really? The short form, Rajon Rondo is a Connect 4 terrorist, and he used to brutalize young kids while playing it, would just beat them savagely in Connect 4.
But what is that? Is Thad Young, would he beat Rondo, or?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay,
He would be his equal in
Yeah.
Connect 4. And off-court academic means Connect 4, obviously.
That's the only. I think that's what academia really is, the pinnacle of
Gamified situations. That's right. Yes.
So, he figured it out, man. He figured out how to offer strengths regardless, and he ended up being really, really critical for Toronto.
Yep. I loved that they used him as his own buster, especially in the playoffs. That was a really unique wrinkle. Defensively, I thought that he was great in isolation. Man. I thought he was great in isolation. He failed. Of course he fails from time to time. But I saw many declarations that he was food for James Harden. I disagreed with that notion. I thought he was sticking with dudes. And, Thad at his age in this scheme to be sticking with dudes, and then when he's not sticking with dudes to be gumming everything else up, it's not a surprise that he became the on-off defensive, king. It doesn't surprise me at all.
He's had the highest steal rate of his career in Toronto.
Checks out.
Highest on the team. He found ways.
Corner 3-point.
He made corner 3 for the first time in his career. He said, well, if this is what I have to do, then this is what I'm going to do.
The long wind-up triple, it wasn't a big thing in the playoffs, but,
because of the injury. When we talk about injuries, it impacts things in very specific ways. And his jumper was clearly affected by the sprain.
Which is really too bad.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to say about Thad?
I hope he returns. I know this isn't the point of the podcast. Hope he returns to Toronto. I was a big fan of his on the court. Think he helped Toronto dramatically. And it's funny, on a team full of wings who physically all look like Thad Young, he still filled a hole that no one else did.
Yeah, that's true. But that's the thing, right? Is we've talked about this before, but focusing on the size is the easy part. But in reality, the people who know are focused on skill sets. Yep. And I think that's Thad. That was a skill set that was not seen elsewhere.
And I think I think what most impressed me was his not sleeping dragonness. Like Scottie Barnes, like Precious Achiuwa, he was always going to try stuff. And
he did, yeah.
The Raptors, for all their strengths, their flaw was a lack of guys who try stuff. Especially on a team that runs read and react offense. If you have Luka Doncic, you don't need guys to try stuff. The Raptors needed guys to try stuff. And it looked ugly when no one would. And Thad would always try. He'd try to fit a bounce pass into a tiny window, take someone off the dribble. He was never sleeping. And that is how he was able to find his way to success with the team.
Rumble into the lane, try and hit an 8-foot underhand shot. He'd airball some, he'd make others, trying things. Dragon. As far as pieces of the rotation, we'll rapid fire everybody else. And Khem Birch is you take as long as you want for your rapid fire, but you take the Khem Birch thing. I will take Champagny after that. We'll do Svi. We'll do Malachi. We'll do all that kind of stuff.
So I actually had one question coming into this. You do the prep for these. I don't do the prep. We talked in the beginning of the year about Khem Birch, and I overrated his significance to the team, especially on the defensive end. That's really where I saw his value. And I twice messaged you and tried to re-litigate, willing to concede ground, but now is the time. Let's relitigate. Where do you stand now on Khem Birch's defensive significance to the team?
Roughly the same place.
Yeah.
I did not think he was as quick as you saw him as. I did not think he was as much of a rim deterrent as you may have seen him as. But, you know, you could be thinking about 3 games, honestly. And those 3 games could loom large in your head. And you could say, finally, if we see this guy healthy, he's
Yeah.
going to achieve this. And so nobody likes to be right as a pessimist. You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
Gary being good and me being like, oh yeah, he's just me being like, yeah, he's really bad on defense. Am I going to be like, haha, he's really bad on defense if he has a really bad defensive year? That sucks, dude. I would hate that. He proved me wrong.
It's great to be wrong.
Yes, it's great to be wrong. I wish Khem Birch was healthy, not only this year, but so much of his career. He's just like a what if guy because so
Yep.
many aspects of his game that make him special. You want to talk about being able to hang with Jokic and being, quick enough, strong enough, and principled enough, and thinks through the defensive possessions enough to actually kind of win some against Jokic. That's a rare thing to be able to
Yep.
do, and it doesn't happen very often. And you're just sad that he can't be able to put that together more consistently because there was a version of Khem that fits on this team somehow. I'd probably still be lower on him than you are, but we just didn't really get to see the fully idealized version of him.
That says it better than I could. I think I've come back to where you are. I still am high, but so much of it is a what if at this point with injury. Offensively, the push shot is nice, probably not enough, as we saw in the playoffs. But that's enough.
It couldn't break the defensive pressure. If you're
Yeah.
gonna have a push shot, if that's gonna be your go-to, it's got to be Rashawn Holmes. It's got to be.
Yeah.
It has to just be doing that. So
There was a possession, maybe the last. No, it was game. Yeah, it was game 6. Maybe his last in the game before he got cut, where Embiid was laying way off him, just 10 feet away from him. Pascal Siakam slipped it through the thicket. He went to the push shot. He got blocked anyway, and I think Nurse kept him. That was the last time he saw him this season.
I think game 5, yeah, the second half, I believe he also missed like on the baseline, and it wasn't particularly close. And you're like, those got to drop, otherwise you just really tank the offense because then Embiid starts floating way like he gets carte blanche after that. So yeah,
that's enough rapid fire though for Kim.
Okay, Justin Champagny, super excited for him to be on the team next year. I think, the 3-point shot was coming at the 905.
Yeah, in the
Like
G League, yeah.
It was hot and heavy. He was hitting a lot of them. Whether that happens at the NBA level, I don't know. I certainly hope so. But if the Raptors, he's also, you want to talk about latent, he was a guy who couldn't finish anything. And it's because all of his shots came off of offensive rebounds, and he's 6'6" in the paint against these behemoths. But I tell you, he, left hand, right hand, that's the guy who his finishing skill hasn't shown in the statistics yet. Champagny, as a sneaky Bruce Brown kind of in-between finisher guy, I think that's there. He was like the 100th percentile in offensive rebounding percentage because he grabbed everything. I wrote that piece that I just loved, Justin Champagny and inherent magnetism, because he is inherently magnetic, the basketball to him or he to the basketball, whatever. And yeah, he was just so fun this year that we watched together with Katie Heindel on the gondola, that tip that was in, but was
he won the game twice. He caught the ball on the baseline, went up that crazy finish, and then the tip in next, and they still lost the game, even though he won the game twice.
Mike Muscala, always Mike Muscala, and Shea saying, I knew they'd double me, so I figured I'd have to pass out. And hey, look what happens. But yeah, Justin, I hope he continues to keep progressing. Super fun to see what he looks like in camp next year because he'll definitely be in camp. And with the team, I guess we'll see. So there's like Tremont, Goran, DJ, Oturu, and David Johnson and Sam Decker. Those are the 5 games or less guys. Do any of those guys pop out?
Yeah, I want to say something here. I got in a lot of flack for saying that the Raptors that Goran Dragic was beneath the Raptors, the booing.
Oh yeah.
I meant literally, like Vince Carter was above the franchise. He left, he took the heart of the team with him, and then he beat them over and over and over. Dragic couldn't crack the rotation. The team didn't want him there. He was literally beneath them. He won 0 playoff games. They won 2. Like when I say beneath, I'm saying you, the fan, are better than booing Goran Dragic because he doesn't matter. You just won a championship. Anyway, it was supposed to be a compliment.
Right.
Taken
It's
out
funny. From Dishes and Dimes, I remember this because I saw you getting so much flack for it. I was like, oh my God. And Iman and Yasmin from Dishes and Dimes both said the exact same thing as you.
A lot of people, I saw a lot of people say it, yeah.
But yeah, you became Justin Champagne. You want to talk about inherent magnetism? Something about the quote tweets of Louis Zatzman on occasion. For whatever reason. Yeah, that was terrible. I man. Anyway, yes, Goran, and also he put the crying laughing emojis after the Raptors got ousted, and then put himself holding Eurobasket championship. And I remember
that's a killer joke.
Writing the piece. Wait, yeah, it is a killer joke. But I remember writing the piece after he came back and he got booed and everything, and I was like, the fans do as they please, but Goran got the most out of it because he got to embrace a villain role as a guy who was not billed as a villain in a movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like Loki got a spin-off because he was such an enthralling villain in MCU. And Goran Dragic got to come in as like this little 2-bit character, and he got to soak up all the energy, and he got to do the shh after he hit a step back jumper. Yeah, like he had fun with it. Raptors fans, I hope they're having more fun with it than they are actual like anger, I hope. But anyway, yeah. And among the other guys, DJ Wilson, I posted
bad luck injury was.
Yeah, just tough. And the rest of the guys tough. Okay, so we have Malachi. You did Malachi's huge review once he got drafted, and so that's why I want you to talk about Malachi, because you were really high on him.
I was really high on his decision-making more than anything. He was a really gifted passer in college. He saw really creative lanes. You taught me the term interpretation. I was really impressed with his pick-and-roll interpretation.
In a basketball context, right?
No, I had never heard the word before.
Oh, stop.
No, yeah, of course, what it meant on the court, right? And I was really impressed. I didn't know what I called it in my head. Oftentimes you learn a term, it's like, oh, I didn't know what that was called, but I've been thinking about it anyway. I was really impressed with his pick and roll interpretations. He struggled to turn the corner on college guys, which I knew was a red flag. I didn't focus on, should have mattered more to me. I love the look of his jumper. I have a habit of valuing my aesthetic appreciation of a jumper more than the numbers at lower levels, which I've been right on many occasions. Malcolm Miller is a good example. Ended up being a really great shooter, he was shooting 30% or something in the G League. And I was like, no, this guy's a sniper. And I was absolutely right. Malachi, I don't know, maybe the jumper turns around. I don't know. I'm not high on the jumper turning around. And it turns out, if your jumper's not great, if you can't turn the corner, and if you don't do a lot off ball, doesn't matter how good your pick and roll interpretations are, you have no business being on the court. Because as we found out with Lorenzo Brown, you can be phenomenal at one thing at any level outside the NBA, but other guys are going to be better than you in the NBA. And if you're not good at other stuff, when those other guys take those reps, like Thad Young, great pick and roll roller. But turns out when he got to the Raptors, other guys are better. And so he had to find other ways. He did. Malachi Flynn didn't. And that's what happened to this season.
You have less interpretations available to you and less potent interpretations available to you if you don't do anything that makes the defense worry. Yep. Why would they change shape if they don't feel as if they're going to be punished? And that is the crux of where Malachi struggles. However, in Fred's first absence, Malachi had a pretty good stretch where the jumper was there. He got to make reads in the open floor a little bit more often, and I thought he did pretty well. And he is the rare case of you're not going to lose his minutes defensively as a young guard. That's really meaningful. I think he's like, I'm sure other teams are talking about Malachi and looking at him as a second draft guy away from the Raptors. The Raptors just don't seem interested in Malachi. It's bad luck for him. And but I think he's an NBA player. The same way I think. Go ahead.
No, the same way you think.
The same way I thought that, Yuta Watanabe was.
Yeah.
And these guys hang around the margins, but you see them and they can stick. And as bad as Yuta has had as a year, as tough as it's been for Malachi to kind of break into it, these guys have enough stuff going that they can stick.
Both of them almost always succeeded when they were given 30-plus minutes.
Yeah.
And Malachi almost always struggled when he was given 10 or fewer. And sucks, but the reality on the Raptors is Malachi Flynn was never getting more than 10 minutes in the rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And if he couldn't port one-to-one his ability to produce in a big role to that smaller role, then they decided he's not part of the future. And I understand it. It's a shame. I agree with you. I think he's an NBA guy. And it's actually not just think. I think it's kind of mashugana to say he's not an NBA guy. He'll land somewhere. That this is not the right team for him.
Mm-hmm. That's it's the Raptors. Why would they? Yeah. What does he do that makes them say, okay, we have to get him in? Because they're not interested in his career. They're interested in the team's success. Yeah. And while there's clearly things that can get better for Malachi, they'll be better on another team. And hopefully a team that's, really cares for what his career looks like.
You look at Campaign in Phoenix.
Right.
Yeah. He improved a lot. Don't get me wrong. Campaign made huge, incredible strides. I wrote all about them for 538. But he also found a very hospitable environment. Most teams want a backup point guard who can set up an offense and do some stuff. Malachi Flynn can do that. He can. I'm not saying he'll become what Campaign became. That's 100th percentile outcome at this point in his career. But there are other teams that want what Malachi does more than Toronto.
Yep, that's right. And the Raptors, famously, they are really picky about backup guards. Honestly, they cut the guard who hit a playoff game winner over top of them. They cut DJ Augustine. They just cut him. And he ended up being a game winner over them. And how many points did he have that game? 25? And outscored Kyle Lowry 25-0. It's the NBA is a funny place, man. And I think
they cut Campaign.
Yes, and they did cut Campaign. They also cut Hassan Whiteside. They've cut
Gary Payton.
Yeah, Gary Payton II. That's right. Yep. And
they didn't bring him up. Right? He was never
right.
actual,
right.
But
he
anyway,
never came up.
We're way in the weeds, baby.
Yes. Let's go to. We talked about Utah. I'll go with Utah. The defense is less important, which sucks. His defense is less important in this super jumbo-sized version of this really aggressive scheme, where Utah is about like I think Utah would have looked awesome on the Jazz, for example.
I promise you, I was about to say Utah. I was 100%.
controlling those closeouts, funneling properly, and like hitting threes that
Just
are
stand in the
wide.
corner.
Yeah, because it's a Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert pick and roll, I think, or it's Jordan Clarkson or whoever else, right? I think it would have looked great. But with the Raptors not having a ton of stuff created for him, and when the ball came to him on offense and he had to try and make something out of it, not being able to make any contact layups and not being able to make anything from the mid range, and then regressing a little bit from three, all
Yeah.
of that resulted in a guy who just he could not get minutes. And
Yeah.
they gave him a few chances at it, and he didn't find a run of play that dictated, okay, then he's going to get more of the ball. So it's just like it's the inverse of Chris Boucher, maybe
Yeah.
defensively.
It showed in the numbers. They were a very poor team with him on the court, and not in garbage time. In the real numbers, he had 2 or 3 kicks at the can, and it sucked because he had that 26-point game or something.
26 and 13.
I
Boxing
can't
Day.
believe I got that right. Do you have that in front of you, or do you just know that?
I really like Utah, man. That game lives large in my mind. I was
Do you
very happy
remember
for him.
when LeBron James broke down a play and just remembered a few details of it, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, what a
He
genius!"
remembers every play he's ever been a part of.
I'm realizing, like, everyone should remember all these plays. Like, I remember hundreds of plays. Anyway,
Most people just don't verbalize it. But
Yeah.
LeBron is the guy who, opens up the first page of a book and says he's reading the book.
Yeah.
Like
Yuta Watanabe had moments, right? Coming out of the Olympics with Japan, everyone was super high on him. His self-creation. I really thought of second side attackers. He was one of Toronto's best off the bench. He and Svi were kind of both two sides of the same coin, and they both needed the other half in terms of what they might offer the team. And it was a shame because he, by all accounts, is a really, loved dude in the locker room. He is huge for jersey sales for Raptors fans, like financially for the team. It's big having Yuta on the team, which actually makes it less likely, I think, that he's just cast off as they might do with Malachi. But I think the path to minutes for him, the easy path is come and gone. I think there are still paths for him in the future, but it's going to have to be a big battle, an uphill battle at this point.
his first run with the Raptors was a result of winning an uphill battle. So maybe,
That's right.
Maybe he can do it again. And we can all look forward to, I can't remember the reporter's name, but everybody always looks forward to, like, how can he make this about Utah for Nick Nurse to answer, which is like,
Takeshi.
yes, Takeshi.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome little fun post-game thing, which is just like great. So Utah, whatever happens with his career, he just seems like a good man, and he plays some damn fine basketball at times. So I hope
His
everything
nickname's
clicks.
the Chosen One in Japan.
It's also Dayman.
That's your nickname for him.
No, it's on Basketball Reference, as per my Photoshop. It got posted to the Raptors Info Japan page. So
there you go. You're famous now.
Oh yeah, dude. I have the same claim to fame that Ballsack Sports does, being an idiot troll. Good for me. Okay, Svi Mihailuk. Thoughts, sir?
The Raptors needed shooting. They gave him way more kicks at the can than they gave Yuta. He fell backwards into a rotation spot to start the year.
Mm-hmm.
Jumper looks good, looks great. Never put the pieces together. And, he is, as they famously say, sneaky athletic, right? Gets up around the rim. He is a clever finisher and a physical finisher. But if he's not hitting shots, he doesn't get run off the line. He's not going to get to the rim. Defensively, he's really hard to work around. And it all stems from him being a 40% three-point shooter. If he was, he would still be on this team. He would have answered the Raptors' needs, but he's not. And so I don't see him in the team's plans.
It was particularly damning that he never made more than 2 threes in a game.
Yep.
Justin Champagnie made 4 in a game. You know, and you know that Svi was getting a lot of looks. And especially, you talked about, you know, trying to make it in the league and realizing that, like, damn, even the thing you're good at, people just do better and defenders defend it better. Seeing Svi really dominate the little, like, pet play actions, the give and go stuff in preseason, and like his physicality was a big bonus. He could shoot. He was making plays like hard dribble out of a pick and roll, pivot, hit like the extended back pass on that, and you're like, oh, what the hell is this guy going to give us? Like, you know, 5 or 6 pick and roll possessions a game and maybe get something out of it. It was just nothing. He couldn't translate any of it. And despite being like a really great athlete, fluidity, punch, all that kind of stuff, it just
More than
nothing
sneaky.
came together in a meaning. More than sneaky, nothing came together in a meaningful way on the court. And I think that brings us to Delano Banton,
Yeah.
who I think it's fitting that we end the review, because this is the end of the podcast, basically, that we end the review with 2.5 hours with Delano Banton, because he is like, if the scheme is the rising tide that lifts all boats, Delano's was the smallest.
Yeah.
And it sat quite high, you know? So your thoughts on Delano off the jump, I guess.
Scottie Barnes had his first basket of his career was a sweeping left-handed skyhook. And it was the second most impressive first rookie basket of the game, because Delano Banton hit that 3-quarter buzzer-beating shot.
Right.
Talk about high highs, right? They fetishize the qualities he has. Enormously long, clever passer and visionary passer in transition. Incredible offensive rebounder. You talk about Champagny as that 100th percentile. So too, I would say, is Banton for his position, right? He's a guard, so he's a little less than Champagny, who's a wing. He has tools. If he puts it all together, he's very much an NBA rotation player. Defensively, he never really improved throughout the year. That's so normal for rookies who are on the fringe rotations. That's not damning in any way. That's completely expected for rookies in that position. Offensively, his job was extraordinarily hard. It's easy in some ways to be the star because you know what you're getting. You always know what's coming and when. It's so hard to say you're only getting 6 minutes a game. We're not going to tell you when, but every time you play, you have to change the texture of the team. Virtually impossible for anyone, unless you're Thad Young. And so he did okay for a stretch. Then he was overextended and he fell out of the rotation. Totally fine. I don't think he was an NBA rotation guy. This scheme helped him a lot. But toolsy, I mean, like, long, maybe can shoot in the G League. Great passer, clever finisher at times. Like, there's a lot of things to like for his future.
Yeah, that's I took to saying it was kind of a cop-out in the quick reaction or in the reaction podcast. Well, you have a little bit more room in the reaction podcast to dig down on what he does well defensively. But a Delano Banton game, regardless of box score, looked the same, basically. It was just whether or not he was given the ball in advantageous positions, because he more or less would reward you if you gave them in these, hey, you got to make the right read as a passer, or you got to finish at the rim, because his finishing popped off really early too, right? And defensively, he was, if he got a steal, he would push at a breakneck pace. If he was in the lanes, he could get his hand on balls and stuff, and he was quite aggressive at the point of attack. And so he was, and by the fact that he had to run pick and roll possessions for the Raptors, and they would give him the ball above the break, and everything would suck. He could not do anything in the half court. And that's why it's so fitting that we end the podcast with Delano Banton, because he both represented their absolutely soul-crushing limitations, but he also represented their highest highs. And I think, Louis, that's like a podcast.
You hosting podcast, you're poetic. The structure of the podcast reflects the team. I agree with you, man. That's a podcast.
In that I have soul crushing lows and really high
No,
highs.
the structure represents the team, not represents you.
Oh, I'm long and athletic.
Sure.
Okay. Louis, do you want to plug yourself? Do you want to tell the people where they can
No,
find you?
man. No one. It's been 2.5 hours. You know where to find. If you're here after 2.5 hours, you know exactly who I am and where to find my stuff.
If you are here after 2.5 hours, tweet at me swordfish and I'll follow you. Thanks for sticking with us for 2.5 hours. Louis, thanks for coming on, man, and dedicating 2.5 hours of your time to me, little me. And listener, viewer, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you way more.
Yeah,
thank me a little, thank listener way more.
Thank you way more, listener. We'll get out of here. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you.